You are listening to the series, Even After Death, by author EvilAuthor. Olivia Fordham was married to Ethan Miller for 3 years, but that time could not compare with the 10 years he spent loving his first love, Marina Carlton. On the day that she gets diagnosed with stomach cancer, Ethan happens to be accompanying Marina to her children's health checkup. She doesn't make any kind of fuss, only leaving quietly with the divorce agreement. However, this attracts an even more fervent retribution. It seems Ethan only ever married Olivia to take revenge for what happened to his little sister. While Olivia is plagued by her sickness, he holds her chin and says coldly, "This is what your family owes me." Now, she has no family and no future. Her father becomes comatose after a car accident, leaving her with nothing to live for. Thus, she hurls herself from a building. The life my family owes will now be repaid. At this, Ethan, who's usually calm, panics while begging for Olivia to come back as if he's in a state of frenzy. The following is the main content. Episode 3. Olivia freed herself from Ethan's grip after Keith left. She replied flatly, "Oh, I'm doing just fine." After a few days of rest and recuperation, her complexion looked healthier, a huge contrast to her previous sickly self. He mumbled under his breath, "Right. You've always been as fit as a fiddle." She secretly snickered at him but did not attempt to add any explanation. Taking his jacket off, she said, "Mr. Miller, don't worry. I will stick to the terms of our agreement. I shall not remarry." Ethan had poured his heart into drafting their divorce agreement. Even though he gave her wealth, he destroyed her future by adding a clause to the agreement. It prohibited her from remarrying. If she ever did, she would need to pay him 10 times the settlement he provided her, which would stand at 10 billion. Still, she signed the agreement without flinching because her days were numbered anyway. The alcohol in her stomach made her sick. Attacked relentlessly by the sharp pangs of pain, she held it in and attempted to leave. But he held her wrist where Keith had previously grasped. She grimaced. "Mr. Miller, your fiancé is still waiting for you. Do you really want the guests to find out that I'm your ex-wife?" He ignored her words and growled quietly, "It's dirty here. You need to clean it." Somehow, Ethan felt like the sick one between them. Why did his possessiveness skyrocket after the divorce? He was acting like a psycho. He dragged her to the elevator. She wanted to argue with him, but the elevator stopped on the 5th floor. A bunch of drunkards staggered in. Frowning, he took a step back and forced her into a corner. This formed a protective wall that separated her from the drunks. She stared at his back in his pressed suit and the back of his head. His hair was styled immaculately. He might be a disciplined and meticulous person, but he could also be wild and extreme at times. She feared the contradiction that was him. At that time, she felt the pain growing in her stomach. Every part of her body was screaming in pain. And she badly wanted to find a space where she could gasp for breath. But she was stuck in an elevator with 4 reflective walls. She was also wearing a pair of stilettos and standing right behind her ex-husband. Even doubling over would seem like an admission of defeat. His broad shoulders were within reach. She had once leaned on his shoulders for comfort, but it was now a place that was out of bounds for her. She focused on counting the floors in the elevator. After an eternity, she finally reached their destination. The hotel was one of the many properties under the Miller Group, whose business spanned multiple industries. He stole a glance at her when he keyed in the passcode. It was the same code as his safe, a combination of numbers that was related to her. Before she could figure out his intention, she felt a force dragging her into the room. He threw the jacket aside and led her into the bathroom. Holding in the pain, she looked at him. "Mr. Miller, we are divorced. I do not need to fulfill my duty as your trophy wife anymore. I'll leave now." He had pressed on the knob of the shower, and she shivered as the icy water poured all over her. She roared, "Ethan Miller." He clasped her face underneath the shower and stared at her. "Liv, didn't I tell you before not to let any man touch you?" The cold touch of Ethan's fingertips traveled down her cheek like a serpent. It didn't matter what they were fighting over, for he was in one of his episodes again. When they first dated, He wanted her to promise him 3 things: no cheating, no touching other men, and no leaving. She saw hints of his extreme possessiveness from the beginning. After all, he had killed off a family and turned them into ashes just because they slapped her. He'd also be cross when she shined at school. Once, she fell during sports day, and a member of the organizing committee had to carry her to the health center on his back. It was that night she witnessed Ethan's dark side as he ordered her to wash herself clean. Despite her explanations, he forced her to stand under the shower through the night. Despite his craziness, she was hopelessly in love with him. For him, she took an academic leave to keep herself out of the public eye. She didn't expect his madness to worsen after the divorce. Although the side effects from chemo went away, she still struggled with stomach pain. The room didn't have heating. And after the cold shower, she felt nothing but excruciating pain. "Turn it off. I feel cold. Ethan Miller, it's fucking cold." He pushed her body against the cold tiles and flashed her a chilling smile. "Liv, would it help if I warm you up with a hug?" "Psycho. You fucking psycho." Trembling, she reached out to turn off the shower. But he spotted it fast and held her arms over her head. The curves of her body looked perfect under the cascading water. He was similarly attractive. His abs were visible under the white shirt that was drenched. He pressed his warm body against hers in a flirtatious move. He cocked his head and whispered into her ear, "Liv, you can only be mine even after the divorce. Have you forgotten about it? Let me go. I told you nothing happened between me and Keith." She kept her temper under control because she didn't want to push his buttons. He smirked. "Why did you move into his apartment, then? Liv, did you really think that the Rogers could back you up after leaving the Millers? Why don't we make a bet on how long the Rogers could hold out?" Ethan had made a dubious claim, confusing her apartment as Keith's. But she didn't have time to go into the details. She banged her left fist against him to express his anger. She knew that it was useless but still better than not fighting back at all. "Ethan, you were the one who cheated and asked for a divorce. And you are the one who's getting engaged. Please ask your attorney for the proper definition of divorce if you're confused. What right do you have to control me?" She confronted him with a teary voice. "Are you a tyrant or something? If you decided to leave my life, why did you barge in as you wish? If this is your new idea of torture, I'd rather be dead." He kissed away her tears and answered coldly, "Liv, I gave you a chance, but you squandered it. Divorce is only a separation on legal terms. You will live under my control for the rest of your life." She suddenly recalled that, after that night of standing under the shower, he had once asked her if she wanted to leave. He was a beast that would hurt her. And he was willing to send her away to safety before he spiraled out of control. "Do you remember what you said? You hugged me and said that we'd be together in sickness and health. You said you wouldn't abandon me unless death parts us." Olivia tried to make out his handsome face under the dim lighting. "What if I died?" she replied in a thin and unfeeling. "What if I died?" Olivia's almost inaudible mumble bounced off the walls of the bathroom, taking him by surprise. "You won't die because you have me." Sure, he might have endless power and wealth one could wish for, and he had access to the top medical resources in the world. But no doctor would guarantee success in treating late-stage cancer. Ethan might appear omnipotent, holding power over the life and death of other beings. But he was a mere mortal at the end of the day and powerless to save her from the hands of the Grim Reaper. She chuckled. "Ethan, since my family owed you a life, shall I atone for that with my death? Liv, I would have taken your life 2 years ago if I wanted to. I hate you, but I love you at the same time. That's why I'm keeping you alive to punish you." "Did you just say you love me?" She snorted. "If that's true, you wouldn't have betrayed me. I told you I wanted to build a mega hospital with express access for the needy. So, you built a hospital worth a few billion and named a wing after Marina." She went on, "I said I loved the ocean and picked a spot for our future home, but you ended up building Collington Cove for Marina. I wanted to name our child Connor, but you stole that name for your child with Marina. Ethan, do you call that love? The icy water trickled down his jaw. It was hard to see the emotions in his eyes because he was staring at the ground. He seemed to have a lot to say and opened his mouth. But nothing came out in the end. At first, she had wondered if he had a good reason for treating her in that manner. If not, given his character, he wouldn't have kept the passcode around. Upon second thought, she concluded that he was a conflicted man who could love and hate someone simultaneously. Perhaps, that was his way of taking revenge. He wanted to keep her alive, and he knew where it hurt most. Her eyes dimmed. Grabbing his collar, she hissed, "Your love is revolting. Liv, do not anger me. That wouldn't do you any good." He unbuckled his belt, a move that set her alarm bells ringing. What do you want to do? Liv, you need to be punished for your mistake. He enunciated each word of his threat before tying her hands behind her. No, Ethan, you can't do this to me. Olivia panicked, but he was in no mood to listen. He swiftly tied her up and positioned her under the shower with the help of a towel, all while she struggled futilely. He had a unique way of tying the knot, which made it impossible to be undone. Her soft skin reddened under the rough handling. He lifted her chin in his fingers and mumbled into her ear, "Liv, I've seriously considered giving up on you." Despite the tenderness in his voice, he gave her the creeps. He went on, "But whenever I see other men near you, I want to tear them into pieces. Tell me, where else did Keith touch you?" His mania grew with his increasing tenderness. Reminded of Keith's car crash, she frantically cleared Keith's name. "I only ask that he pay extra attention to my dad at the hospital, that's all. I don't know why you said that about the apartment. Dad's caretaker introduced that place to me. My landlord is abroad. Liv, I wanted to trust you, but he visited your place for a few days with stuff for you. Care to explain?" Tears filled her eyes as she suffocated under his craziness and possessiveness. "I couldn't get out of bed because I was sick for a few days. He was worried about my health and brought groceries to cook for me. Can't you tell that he's only stayed for 2 hours tops each time? He'll leave after cooking for me." He furrowed his brows and played with her cheeks. "Are you really sick?" Gently, Ethan loosened his grip on her body. "Liv, remember the punishment from today. Ethan, I'm begging you. Just come at me if you're angry. Don't you do anything to the Rogers family. Hey, untie me. Don't leave me alone here. I'm scared. Ethan, turn off the shower. I'm freezing, and I can't fall sick now." She saw him leaving and heard the click of the door shutting behind him. "Don't leave me alone. I'm wrong. You can torture me in any way you want, just don't leave me alone here. I'm feeling cold. Please let me out. I'll listen. No, don't turn off the lights. I'm scared." There was a moment when he almost caved in after hearing her desperate pleas, but it was a fleeting feeling. He lazily changed into a new outfit and gracefully made his way to the lobby. There, Marina was searching around for him. She felt relieved when he showed up without Olivia by his side. "Ethan, where were you? I was looking high and low for you. I went to the restroom for a bit." "Why?" Ethan concealed his emotions well. She took his arm, but he silently freed himself from her grip and informed her, "I have another appointment at night. Get the driver to send you home after the event." "Okay, don't drink too much, and don't get home too late," she reminded him while putting aside her displeasure. He had not agreed to register their marriage at the city hall that day. She had no choice but to put on a show as his understanding partner and soulmate to get her hands on that marriage certificate. After Ethan left, Marina wiped the smile off her face. His new outfit did not escape her keen eyes. Did he change for the engagement that he would attend later, or was it for Olivia? "Hello, out of my way, now." Everly suddenly strutted over in her heels and recklessly bumped into Marina. "Everly Hilton." That did not stop Everly. "Oh, my bad. I totally didn't notice you at all." Marina was speechless at Everly's jab. She wanted to bicker with Everly, but one of the guests at the scene dragged her back to the venue. Meanwhile, Everly was spamming Olivia with calls. She had wanted to get some gossip from Olivia, but her calls went unanswered. When she recalled how Ethan was on Keith and Olivia's heels, she felt uneasy and dialed Olivia's number once more. No one picked up, and in the heat of the moment, she cursed, "Ethan Miller, you fucker. What the hell is going on? Are you looking for me?" She jolted when she heard a cold male voice in her ear. She looked over and found Ethan smoking a cigarette under the tree. The flicker of the lighter danced between the shadows on his face. Everly's first reaction upon seeing Ethan was to cower. She might have been bold and outspoken at the event, but she was only bolstered by the effect of alcohol in Olivia's presence. She bore witness to Ethan's deep love for Olivia, and she knew that he could be deeply cruel toward outsiders. 2 years ago, she brought Olivia to a bar. When Ethan picked up Olivia, he shot Everly an icy look when Olivia wasn't looking and warned, "This is the last time." She was drenched in cold sweat when Ethan left, and she was haunted by the look in his eyes for a few nights in her dreams. Back to the present, Ethan shut the lighter and casually glanced at her, but it was enough to make her tense up. She gulped and said in a hushed voice, Mr. Miller, I'm looking for Liv. I'll excuse myself now." He shook off the cigarette ashes and gave her a look from the corner of his eye. "Let's chat." She knew it wasn't going to be a casual chat, and as a result, she was reluctant to engage with him. "Well, it's very late at night. How about we chat next time? Promise." She was ready to flee but turned around and bumped into Brent, whom she secretly described as Ethan's hitman. Brent said to her, "Please, Miss Hilton." Close to tears, she followed them to a nearby cafe. She couldn't stop shaking her legs after she was seated, causing the table to rattle as well. When Ethan reached for his cup of latte, he was momentarily surprised by the messed up latte art, all because of Everly's legs shaking. An awkward moment passed between them. She smiled politely at him and handed him the latte. "Mr. Miller, have a latte." Then, she immediately chastised herself in secret for falling into the habit of her line of work. The situation grew awkward. He put the latte aside and spoke to her, "I want to learn more about Olivia and Keith." Everly might have no idea about the brand of Ethan's mental disorder, but she knew about his possessiveness. Olivia's ex-husband couldn't let her go, judging from how he was prodding around about Olivia's life. Everly said bluntly, "Keith probably has feelings for Liv, but she isn't interested in him. Why else would I put in the effort to matchmake?" Hearing that, Ethan grew a little hostile. She recoiled and stole a careful glance at him as though she was meeting her boss. Mr. Miller, are you still interested in Liv?" She had overstepped the boundary. He dodged the question and rapped his knuckles on the table. "What base are they on?" "Oh, God, no. I swear they haven't done anything. Liv was upset after the divorce and didn't even step out of her place for a long time. I had to talk her into coming to the event today. I don't know why Keith showed up, but he probably attended at Calvin's invitation. Liv had nothing to do with that." Ethan's suffocating silence and his unreadable eyes spooked Everly. She couldn't tell if he trusted her words, and she wondered how Olivia managed to live with a man who barely showed his emotions. "Well, I can swear on my life. If there was something between Liv and Keith, I'd be crushed by a car." He finally looked at her but remained expressionless. She gritted her teeth and swore, "I'd be forever alone if that happened." He seemed to think that wasn't brutal enough and added to the curse, "You'd be broke for life." Ethan was shrewd enough to hit her where it hurt. She clenched her jaw and said, "Fine. I'd be broke for life if that happened." Everly's first reaction upon seeing Ethan was to cower. She might have been bold and outspoken at the event, but she was only bolstered by the effect of alcohol in Olivia's presence. She bore witness to Ethan's deep love for Olivia, and she knew that he could be deeply cruel toward outsiders. 2 years ago, she brought Olivia to a bar. When Ethan picked up Olivia, he shot Everly an icy look when Olivia wasn't looking and warned, "This is the last time." She was drenched in cold sweat when Ethan left, and she was haunted by the look in his eyes for a few nights in her dreams. Back to the present, Ethan shut the lighter and casually glanced at her, but it was enough to make her tense up. She gulped and said in a hushed voice, Mr. Miller, I'm looking for Liv. I'll excuse myself now." He shook off the cigarette ashes and gave her a look from the corner of his eye. "Let's chat." She knew it wasn't going to be a casual chat, and as a result, she was reluctant to engage with him. "Well, it's very late at night. How about we chat next time? Promise." She was ready to flee but turned around and bumped into Brent, whom she secretly described as Ethan's hitman. Brent said to her, "Please, Miss Hilton." Close to tears, she followed them to a nearby cafe. She couldn't stop shaking her legs after she was seated, causing the table to rattle as well. When Ethan reached for his cup of latte, he was momentarily surprised by the messed up latte art, all because of Everly's legs shaking. An awkward moment passed between them. She smiled politely at him and handed him the latte. "Mr. Miller, have a latte." Then, she immediately chastised herself in secret for falling into the habit of her line of work. The situation grew awkward. He put the latte aside and spoke to her. "I want to learn more about Olivia and Keith." Everly might have no idea about the brand of Ethan's mental disorder, but she knew about his possessiveness. Olivia's ex-husband couldn't let her go, judging from how he was prodding around about Olivia's life. Everly said bluntly, "Keith probably has feelings for Liv, but she isn't interested in him. Why else would I put in the effort to matchmake?" Hearing that, Ethan grew a little hostile. She recoiled and stole a careful glance at him as though she was meeting her boss. Mr. Miller, are you still interested in Liv?" She had overstepped the boundary. He dodged the question and rapped his knuckles on the table. "What base are they on?" "Oh, God, no. I swear they haven't done anything. Liv was upset after the divorce and didn't even step out of her place for a long time. I had to talk her into coming to the event today. I don't know why Keith showed up, but he probably attended at Calvin's invitation. Liv had nothing to do with that." Ethan's suffocating silence and his unreadable eyes spooked Everly. She couldn't tell if he trusted her words, and she wondered how Olivia managed to live with a man who barely showed his emotions. "Well, I can swear on my life. If there was something between Liv and Keith, I'd be crushed by a car." He finally looked at her but remained expressionless. She gritted her teeth and swore, "I'd be forever alone if that happened." He seemed to think that wasn't brutal enough and added to the curse, "You'd be broke for life." Ethan was shrewd enough to hit her where it hurt. She clenched her jaw and said, "Fine. I'd be broke for life if that happened." Ethan thought he was familiar with every nook and cranny of Olivia's body, but it was his first time seeing the scar on her lower abdomen. He was aware that she went under the knife without anesthesia due to her allergy. Waiting outside the operating theater, Ethan heard her screams of pain from within. He knew of the layers of her skin that were sutured and the amount of stitches she received on that day. Apart from the wound on the abdomen, Olivia suffered a new injury on her inner left arm. He suddenly recalled that she once visited the hospital on the day Marina made a scene. He thought Olivia merely suffered from some minor abrasions from that day, but he was shocked to discover the long scar. For someone who had a fear of pain, how did she manage to suffer in silence and brush it off later? Pursing his lips, he remembered Olivia's words before she blacked out. Her words felt like a stab to his heart. He changed her into pajamas and ramped up the heating in the room as he hugged her tightly. Soon, Brent arrived with Chris Atkins, and the two men LTOON instinctively backed out when they saw Ethan hugging Olivia. Ethan barked, "Get the fuck back. Check up on her." "Of course, Mr. Miller." Chris was Ethan's family doctor. His presence was only required for minor issues, such as a bruise on the arm or a twisted ankle, because Olivia was always in good shape. He always joked that she was as fit as a fiddle, but after 2 years of not seeing her, he found her lying feebly on the bed, looking as pale as a ghost. Chris summed up the diagnosis, "Mr. Miller, based on my initial assessment, Mrs. Miller passed out because her body was too weak. She was exposed to the cold just now, so she had to be kept warm to avoid running a fever. The wounds on her wrists are superficial injuries, but they need to be treated carefully. She's weak. Olivia did appear quite unwell some time ago, but she should have recovered from the flu by now." "That's right. Her heart rate and pulse are below average, and she shows symptoms of heartburn too." I'm not an expert like my mentor, though. If you are free, you should send Mrs. Miller to the hospital for a detailed checkup. Then, Chris pulled out the needle that he had inserted for blood sampling. I collected her blood to run some tests at the hospital. We'll need to find out if this is a viral or bacterial infection before we can administer the right treatment. Good. It was a tortuous night for Olivia, who had a long dream. In the dream, she ran into a young man in a white shirt at the school field for the first time. It was love at first sight for her. They met for the second time when he saved her from drowning. She vividly remembered the excitement and joy that filled her body. In a moment of panic, she wrapped her arms around his neck. Her body sensed the muscular build of his, which caused her to blush in embarrassment. After that, they fell in love with each other and went into a relationship. When they were together, he doted on her like never before. It would have been nice for the dream to end at that point to save her from the ensuing suffering. Ethan watched as she frowned and mumbled in her sleep, "My baby. Ethan Miller, give me back my baby." She went on, "Ethan, I will give up my life for you. Please let me go, Ethan." Every single remark was related to him and full of resentment. He reached out to take her hand and mumbled, "Liv, how can I free you when nobody could free me?" He was worried that by letting go, he'd lose his only connection to her. Her hand was scathing hot. Just like Chris had predicted, she was running a fever. Ethan put a fever plaster on her forehead and prepared some pills for her. But he was interrupted by Brent, who barged in without knocking. "Mr. Miller, we got the results of the blood test. All of Mrs. Miller's indices were lower than the average. The count of her red and white blood cells was especially low. Dr. Atkins said that she could not run a fever because her white blood cell count was at 2.3. A fever can be fatal for her. She needs a Neulasta injection right away." What did you say?" The pills in Ethan's hand were scattered all over the floor. To Ethan, Olivia was the symbol of vitality. Hence, he was flustered when Brent mentioned the potentially fatal condition that she was in. Brent went up to him and showed him the photos of the blood test results on the phone. Apart from the blood cell count, Olivia had a lower than average count for the other lymphatic cells. Ethan tried to grasp the consequences of his actions in full. He remembered her desperate screaming when he left her alone in the bathroom. Feeling disoriented, he replied, "Well, she's running a fever now. That's bad. We need to get her to the hospital. Get the car." Ethan recalled how Olivia had always shown up wrapped in a thick down jacket. That was rather unusual because she had only worn thin wool coats during the past winters to look good. It finally dawned on him. She wasn't faking her illness all this time. He clumsily wrapped her up in layers of clothing, seemingly worried that the cold air might seep in. She looked both pitiful and lovable due to her flushed cheeks. This was not her first fever, so why would it be particularly fatal for her? When he lifted her in his arms, his chest tightened because he realized that she lost a lot of weight. Ethan rushed Olivia to a private hospital in the dark of the night. Chris came over with the blood test results and opined, "Mr. Miller, I've had a better idea of her condition. Mrs. Miller needs a Neulasta injection first because she's in a critical condition." Ethan was holding on to the feverish Olivia from the moment he arrived at the hospital, and she was mumbling non-stop. With a hand on her belly, she extended the other hand to grasp at the air. "Ethan, save me, save our baby." She was hooked to an IV drip via the back of her right hand. So he had to stop her hand from moving around to prevent the needle from coming loose. She grabbed his hand desperately. Her contorted face finally relaxed a little as her anxiety melted into a relieved smile. "Sweetie, Mommy has found you at last. Are you blaming me because I didn't protect you well? Don't you worry, Mommy will be with you very soon." Upon hearing her feverish mumble, Ethan's frown deepened. He instructed, "Brent, get Connor here. Just tell them that I missed him." "Will do." Ethan only had faith in his efforts, not fate or luck. Still, he was spooked by the ominous words from her lips. It was true that he once hated Olivia because her family was connected to his sister's death. But he never thought Olivia would die. He arranged for Olivia to undergo a series of body checkups once she recovered from the fever. "Liv, you'll be fine. I won't let anything bad happen to you." However, the reality was often disappointing. Despite Chris' best efforts, he failed to make the fever go away. If the fever went on, Olivia would be headed toward death. "Loser. You can't even treat a fever." Enraged, Ethan grabbed Chris by the collar and hissed, "If anything happens to her, I'll withdraw my funding for your research team." Chris felt it unfair and argued, "Mr. Miller, we tried our best, but this is a very tricky situation. It appears that she has lost the will to live." "Rubbish." Ethan's eyes glimmered threateningly. Olivia was a tough culdie. And with Jeff still around, she wouldn't possibly give up on life just yet. Chris explained helplessly, "Mr. Miller, we're not trying to shun our responsibility here. Look, the brain is the command center of all our bodily functions. Many medical miracles happened because the patients exhibited an unyielding will to live. I'm sure you have experienced this before. Even if you're staring at death, there will be a miracle if you are determined to stay alive." Chris added, "But Mrs. Miller has given up on life. I'm afraid that." Ethan let go of Chris' collar and stumbled backward as Olivia's words echoed in his mind. "Ethan, I was wrong. Meeting you in this life was a mistake." She must have hated herself to the extent of giving up on her life. For the first time, Chris picked up a hint of fear on Ethan's face. After a long silence, Ethan finally questioned, "I went through her blood test results. Why are the indices lower than average? In situations like these, she's likely having..." Chris stopped himself from telling the truth. After a round of chemo, the patient's blood cell indices would fall under the average. Although he had not performed health checks for Olivia in the past 2 years, he highly doubted that she had cancer because she was healthy and young. Statistically, cancer patients were mostly middle-aged or older. Since the situation was tense, he didn't want to scare Ethan before there was a conclusive result. "Likely having what?" "Nothing. Did you notice anything off with Mrs. Miller lately? She fell ill a while ago, and she suffered an arm injury." "Oh, that could be the reason. Viral infections might affect the blood cell indices. She probably hadn't fully recovered when she took that cold shower. That might have worsened her condition." Ethan's heart ached when Chris made the assumptions. Chris noticed the change in Ethan's expression and added, "Mrs. Miller is immunocompromised now, so please take good care of her. She can't catch a cold and fall sick. I'll increase the dosage of her meds. The priority now is to get her fever down." Ethan's arms hung limply by his side as he muttered, "Okay." Back at Collington Cove, Marina was elated when Ethan requested to see Connor. She was not informed of the circumstances. The kid started bearing a close resemblance to his father. And she assumed that was the reason Ethan doted on him. The more Ethan was interested in Connor, the more it turned the situation in Marina's favor. She wasn't too worried about her place in Ethan's life, because she knew that he'd agree to register their marriage one day. Brent showed up at the patient room with Connor in his arms. Olivia was still in critical condition due to the fever. "Papa, I want a hug." Connor extended his chubby arms toward Ethan. Ethan took the kid and pointed at the feverish woman in bed. "Look, who is that?" Connor's eyes lit up. "Mama, I want, Mama." Ethan gently placed Connor by Olivia's side. "Give her a hug." The kid was very smart. He wriggled his way into Olivia's arms without needing further instructions from his father. He then eagerly rested his little head on Olivia's inner elbow. Ethan wiped away the tears on Olivia's face and whispered in her ear, "Stop crying. Your baby is back." For a year or so, Olivia had been having the same nightmare, where a kid would cry and ask her for the reason she abandoned him. But she never got to see the face of the kid. This time around, she did not see any kid in her dream. Instead, she saw an endless ocean sprawling in front of her, and she waded deeper into the waters. She was in a state of tranquility. "Sweetie, you've waited for a long time. Mommy will be with you soon. Mama." Suddenly, she heard a kid's voice from behind. The scenery in Olivia's dream changed from the ocean to a lovely sunflower field. A kid was running and giggling in the field. "Mama, come get me." "Oh, sweetie, my sweet child." When she caught up with the kid, she pulled him into a hug. "I finally found you, my baby. I'm sorry. I will protect you well now." She turned the kid around and was astonished to see Connor's meaty face. It suddenly started pouring, and she had to run to a shelter with the kid. She was drenched by the rain. At that moment, she woke up from the dream, and the first thing she saw was the kid with a meaty face drooling from his lips. The drool almost fell onto her face, but Ethan was fast enough to wipe it away. When they exchanged glances, the air became a little awkward. After all, Ethan had sported an image of a haughty company president. Nobody had ever caught him in such an unbefitting act. Olivia chuckled after she noticed the unfamiliar environment. "Is this a dream? Am I dead? Why would I dream of you both?" He frowned and said frostily, "Is that what you wish? Death? Yeah, I'll be free after I die." She still thought she was in a dream and pinched Connor's chubby face, which was pleasant to the touch. Staying alive is tiring. Unable to understand the adults' conversation, Connor, who had developed a liking for Olivia, attempted to climb onto her. Drooling, he chanted, "Mama! Mama, I want a hug." His childish talk instantly made her tear up. What did you call me?" Ethan did not stop her. If she couldn't even stay alive for Jeff, perhaps she needed something new to keep her around. In fact, he was proven right. The kid had pulled her back from the brink of death. "Mama, kiss." Connor was at an age where he only knew a few simple words. Oddly, he had never called Marina Mama before. When they were together with the nanny, Marina got frustrated from teaching Connor how to address her. She even described Connor as an idiot who didn't know how to address his mother at 1 year old. Connor, the sweet child, kept calling out to Olivia. She hugged Connor tightly as though he was the baby she had lost. Connor wrapped his arms around her neck and rubbed his face against it after he succeeded in hugging her after a few failed attempts prior. Tears trickled down her face. "Oh, dear child, it'd be nice if you were mine." Connor stared at her with his innocent dark eyes and an adorable smile. "Mama." His drool fell onto her neck. It was a little chilly and very real, which made her snap back into reality. She examined her surroundings and determined that she was in a hospital room that reeked of disinfectant. Ethan, standing by the bed without expression, exhibited a rare look of concern in his eyes. "How are you doing? You okay?" She realized that she was neither in a dream nor in hell. Her face fell upon recalling what he had done to her. "Yeah, I'm alive. No thanks to you, of course." Ethan reached out to touch her forehead, but she dodged his move. "Mr. Miller, please don't cross the line. I just wanted to know if you're still running a fever," he explained. To that, she flashed a caustic smile. "Don't you think you're quite ridiculous? You were the one who tied me up under the cold shower. You're not a 3-year-old, you knew the consequences, so why did you act like you cared after I caught a fever? I didn't know you were weak. And I didn't know you'd be in critical condition after getting a fever." Her smile widened. "Does that matter? Plus, we are divorced, but you keep acting like you are in love with me. That's sickening." She had no idea why Connor was in her room, but she knew that it wouldn't be wise to have him stay around her. Now that she was back to herself, she gently pulled Connor away from her. She then tossed the blanket aside and took out the IV drip needle from the back of her hand. Droplets of blood trickled down the tiny wound, but she did not wince nor take a look at it. "You." Still feeble, she slowly got out of bed with a determined look in her eyes. Straightening her back, she told him, "Ethan, you were the one who cheated and asked for a divorce. If you are still angry about your sister's death, I can make it up to you with my death." Without warning, she hopped up to the balcony nearby. They were on the 7th floor, and a fall might mean paralysis or death. Ethan, shocked by her extreme decision, yelled, "Liv, calm down." Dressed in thin pajamas and barefooted, she stood there in the middle of the icy winds that ruffled the white curtains. Snowflakes landed and melted on her bloodless face. Her eyes were calm and devoid of any passion for life. Ethan, you might not know this, but I have loved you for many years. I fell in love with you from the first time we met. I remembered how you saved me from drowning. At that moment, I thought it'd be nice if I could marry you. When we started dating, I had the best time of my life. But I also started worrying every day. My life has been smooth sailing from the start, and I worried that one day, God might take away my blessings. I allowed myself to carefully savor your love for what I hoped would be a long time. But karma caught up to me soon. In 2 years, I went from heaven to hell and lost everything overnight. At first, I couldn't believe that you had cheated on me. I even thought it was a nightmare and that you might return to me one day. But I woke up to see you swimming toward Marina. You abandoned my baby and me. It took me a year to get everything back on track. There was no point crying over spilled milk, so I respected your decision. I thought that we would live separate lives after the divorce. But look at what you did to me. You threatened me and even hurt the people who cared about me. I do not know if you hate me or love me more. What I do know is that you will not stop if I am still alive. This thing between us will haunt me till death. It's a miserable life that I'm tired of. Ethan, you know I was once a cheerful and free spirit. After I agreed to marry you, I felt like I lost my wings. I sacrificed my freedom to stay by your side, but you still betrayed me in the end. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she continued. I don't blame you for falling in love with another. I guess I have to blame fate for where we are right now. If you are still stuck in a rut because of your sister's death, I will atone for it with my death. From now on, I would love to enjoy my freedom. We're even. Olivia stared at the pale moon in the sky, which was an apt reflection of her miserable and meaningless life. She no longer wished to be involved with Ethan and sought death. In death, there would be no love or hate. Perhaps, he might give up obsessing over her if she were dead. To her surprise, Ethan jumped and grabbed her wrist when she plunged from the balcony. Connor was disturbed by the scene and hurriedly hopped off the bed. He then jogged out of the room to look for Brent. Brent was smoking outside the room but put it out when he saw the kid stumbling toward him. He crouched and patiently asked, "Hey, Connor. Why are you out here?" Panicking, Connor explained, "Mama." Cry. He attempted to communicate with gestures, but Brent had no idea what he was trying to say. Brent lifted Connor into his arms. "I'll send you back to the room. It's cold out here. You shouldn't catch a cold." Meanwhile, Ethan was holding onto Olivia's hand. She looked at him emotionlessly. "Ethan, I thought you hated me. You'll get the revenge you wanted for your sister if I die." Half of his body was dangling out of the window in an attempt to hold onto her. The veins on his arms were bulging, and his temples were throbbing. He grabbed her tighter and hissed, "Olivia, I'll kill your dad if you try to kill yourself." She flashed him a half smile. He's in a coma anyway, and he might never wake up. Maybe death would be a relief for him. Who says he's never waking up? I tracked down Leo. If he leads the surgery, your dad will have an 80% chance of waking up. You were in the medical field, and you must have heard about his reputation. Finally, he caught a glimpse of change in her expression. He worked on coaxing her, "Sure, I hated you and your dad. But now, your family's done for, he's in a coma, and we're separated. I no longer resent you." A falling piece of a snowflake was caught in her long lashes. It looked like the brittle wings of butterflies. "Ethan, you have a new family, and I no longer want to be in this world. Please let me go. It'll be good for both of us." She knew very well that Ethan's ceasefire was only temporary. She added, "We'll never return to where we were. Never." He stared at her bloodied wrist with fear in his face. It was rare to see him in such a state. She beamed. "Oh, looks like you're scared of me dying. Would that make you remember me forever? You cannot die without my permission. I'll hold you tight, and you can get yourself up with my help." He wanted to pull her up when Brent burst into the room. Brent almost lost his mind at the terrifying scene of Ethan dangerously hanging out of the window. More importantly, Olivia seemed dead set on dying, which complicated the rescue efforts. Brent quickly called the bodyguards on the ground to get them prepared. Then, he placed Camor on the bed and joined the rescue. "Mrs. Miller, every hardship is only temporary. Just tell Mr. Miller what's going on, and I'm sure he will agree to help. Please don't throw away your life. You're still young with a long road ahead of you." With Brent's help, Ethan managed to straighten up as they dragged Olivia further up. However, she was determined to meet her fate. Rather than getting entangled with Ethan, she chose death. "Brent, it's the end of the road for me." Without warning, she let go of one of her hands, and they went back to square one. "Mrs. Miller." Ethan was bent over the window but did not let go. He held onto her hand, which was his only hope at the moment. He truly panicked. Even after multiple near-death experiences, he had never felt fear like this. He finally understood how much she meant to him. "Liv, if you die today, I will bankrupt the Rogers family. You know I am a man of my word. Ethan, even when we're staring at death, you are still a self-centered jackass." She flashed him a wide smile. "You cannot threaten a person who wants to die. Nothing concerns me once I'm dead. Why must you choose death? If you had wanted to kill yourself, you wouldn't have waited until today. You would have done it a year ago or even at that time when your family went bankrupt. Liv, since when have you become so hopeless?" Ethan could not read her. In the past, she would fight her way through any challenges and never back down. Why did she see no way out except for death now? She had survived the darkest period of her life. With the wealth from the divorce settlement, she could have lived a carefree life doing whatever she wanted. "I can give you whatever you want." He finally gave in. "Ethan, did you think that I'd forgive you just because you coaxed me after how badly you hurt me? How can you go about with your life, pretending that nothing has ever happened? Do you always think you can control everything?" She added, "Let me be frank with you, you were never in control. It was Marina who pushed me into the water a year ago. She wanted to know who you'd save if we both fell into the water. I would never gamble with my child's life. Sure, I can swim, but have you thought that I was pregnant? Or that I was suffering from cramps? My legs were tangled in fishing nets, and I almost died with the baby that day." She raged. "When I was tied up in the bathroom, I begged you to save me, just like the day I was pushed into the water. But you still thought that I would be fine. Ethan, I'm fed up with your arrogance, your volatile temper, and your contradictory nature. You cannot control my life, and you won't have control over my death." Then, she swung her body hard, and her fingers slid from his palm. "No, Liv, it'd be great if I hadn't met you back then. You didn't know that you were a huge part of my youth. You were on my mind for many years just because you glanced at me once. But, it's time to put an end to it today." She forced a smile. "Ethan, if reincarnation is a thing, I hope I won't come across you ever." With that, she freed her hand from his grasp. "Goodbye, my youthful days. Ethan, let's never meet again." With steely determination, Olivia jumped off the 7th floor to sever her ties to Ethan. Unexpectedly, Ethan quickly kicked against the ledge to launch himself into the air and fell beside her. Her eyes widened at the sight. She wondered, is he insane? Among the flurry of snowflakes, she locked eyes with him. Glaring, he threw himself at her with all his might like a net. She had always failed to escape him, like a moth drawn to a flame. But the flames burned her, and she regretted getting close. Ethan would not stop even after he shattered her heart. He would continue to torment and oppress her. Ethan hugged her tight, and the two intertwined bodies descended from the air at great speed. On the ground, Kelvin quickly moved a few inflatable cushions from a nearby event with the help of the bodyguards, and they managed to set it up at the last minute. With a loud thud, Ethan and Olivia crashed into the inflatable cushions before rolling onto the ground. The cushions buffered their fall, and they were free from any injuries. Seeing that, Brent let out a relieved sigh from the 7th floor. He felt thankful that he came prepared and thus averted a tragedy. Meanwhile, Kelvin and the bodyguards were flabbergasted. They couldn't bear the responsibility if something had happened to Ethan. Ethan rolled off the cushion and hit the floor hard. Despite frowning from the pain, he never made a sound. He hugged Olivia tightly in his arms to protect her from getting hurt. Even so, the first thing she did when she climbed up was to slap him across the face. "Ethan Miller, how dare you take away my right to die? I thought you hated me. You should be happy to see me dead." Ignoring the pain from his back, he grabbed her tiny wrist with raging eyes. Like a provoked beast, he growled, "Because death is an escape. I want you to live out the rest of your life in shame and hopelessness to make up for my sister's death." She sniffled and felt chills spread across her body. Perhaps it was from the outdoor temperature or Ethan's cruelty. In no time, he stood up and towered over her. Even the dim light from the street lamp failed to add warmth to his visage. His tense jaw and features that were a blur in the snow flurry made him appear grimmer. There was a certain regal air about him that made her feel like a peasant at his feet. Panic set in as she felt that she was not in control anymore. Given the disparity between their status and power, and the fact that she had provoked him earlier, he might give her a harder time from now on. The hem of his coat fluttered in the cold winds as he lifted her chin. "Olivia Fordham, this is an exception. If you try to kill yourself again, I'll ensure the people around you will join you in the afterlife. Keith Rogers, Everly Hilton, Jeff Fordham. You name it." He tightened his grip on her chin, almost making her cry from the pain. His gaze was cold. "Olivia Fordham, don't ever think of dying before you fully atone for your sins." When he reached out, her first reaction was to run. Ethan snickered as he took Olivia by the wrist and scooped her into his arms. He was a little rough with her because of his anger, and he pinned her legs against his body with his arms. She tried to free herself but withdrew her hands when her fingers accidentally brushed against his neck. The warmth of his body lingered on her fingertips. "Ethan, let go of me." She struggled with all her might, but it was futile. Giving up, she stayed in his arms as he walked through the snow linen path. The snow crunched underneath his boots during the walk to her room. He did not say a word, letting the silence hang over them. The heating in the room warmed up her freezing body. Unaware of the events, Connor stumbled toward her as though he wanted a hug. She reflexively reached out to hug him when she saw the tears and snot on his face. However, Ethan lifted the poor kid by the collar and instructed his men icily, "Send Connor home." "Got it." Brent was relieved when he confirmed that Olivia was unhurt. Chris came by and performed a checkup before hooking her to an IV drip. He advised her, "Your white blood cell count is very low. Please do not overexert your body. Or else, no one can save your life the next time." She merely grunted as she stared emptily at the ceiling like a ragdoll. Now that Ethan had trapped her and taken away chance at dying, what more could she do? "Yeah, I understood. You'd better." Ethan finally looked away from her and strode out of her room. Het. Chris cautiously followed the hostile Ethan out and almost bumped into him when Ethan abruptly stopped in his tracks. Ethan turned around with a scowl and hissed, "Find out the reason behind her low white blood cell count." He sensed that something was off from the chain of events earlier. Olivia, who had always been fit, had suffered from a low white blood cell count after a fever. Moreover, she jumped from the 7th floor without hesitation. When he recalled her feeble condition and fainting spells, he believed that the issue was more complicated than it seemed. Chris nodded. "Sure, Mr. Miller. We'll get her a full checkup tomorrow. You don't have to worry too much. She hasn't done any checkups in the last 2 years, but there's a low chance of her developing chronic diseases based on her past health records." "That better be it." Chris gave Ethan a respectful nod when the latter left the hospital. He was careful not to further anger Ethan at such a sensitive time. Then, he rushed back to his office, where he printed the list of checkups that Olivia had to undergo. That night, Olivia's fever finally went away. A nurse came in early in the morning to wake her up. "Ms. Fordham, it's time for a checkup." That immediately pulled her out of her groggy state. "What?" The nurse patiently explained, "Ms. Fordham, you must undergo some advanced checkups." That sent a chill down her spine. She wondered if Ethan had picked up any clues on her condition. Although Chris only got a few hours of sleep, he showed up looking fresh. Since Ethan wasn't around, he told Olivia, "Mrs. Miller, your husband really cares about you. Look at how he arranged all these checkups for you." Olivia wanted to scoff at Chris' assumption. Ethan only wanted her to undergo the checkups to keep her healthy and to suffer from his punishments. She was somewhat curious about Ethan's expression if he knew she had stomach cancer. Anyway, she did not have much of a choice at the moment. She croaked, "Yeah, let's do it." There was a dizzying amount of checkups to be completed. Endoscopy wasn't on the list because the procedure was more complicated. The patient would need to take laxatives after midnight to clear the bowels and go under anesthesia. Olivia wasn't in the condition to be put through the bowel prep. On top of that, she had stuck to a regular daily routine ever since marrying Ethan. Chris assumed that her digestive system was healthy and did not request an endoscopy. The results of the checkup were expedited. Olivia was taking some soup after starving for the entire morning when Ethan showed up at the door. Standing tall, he looked as indifferent as usual. Judging from his attire that commanded authority, a pressed suit and a black and white striped tie, he must have rushed over from work. She had bought him the tie, and the visual reminder brought back sweet memories from long ago. However, after 2 years, there was nothing left between them other than pain. He stared at her pale face, wondering why she always presented herself in a feeble condition. Was there something wrong with her body? "Mr. Miller, don't worry. I will not die. I will not think of killing myself too." She broke the silence and took another mouthful of soup. The back of her hand was all swollen from the injection earlier. She appeared rather pitiful and fragile. Ethan was no longer angry after a night away. "Are the results out yet?" "No." At the mention of the results, she put her spoon down and looked into his eyes. "If something's wrong with me, will you?" He cut her off. "What will go wrong?" "Well, if I caught a terminal disease, for example." She stared straight at him. "Will you consider sparing me?" His heart sank when he heard the question. Taking a seat on the couch, he straightened his back and started rubbing the area between his left thumb and index finger. His tone remained icy. "Tell me about that terminal disease." Although she escaped the endoscopy, she did a CT scan, which might not help determine the type of tumor. However, the CT scan would reveal gastric wall thickening. If the tumor was abnormally large, it might affect nearby tissues and structures. For example, it might affect the left liver lobe. Even the swollen lymph nodes might betray her condition. Knowing that the results would expose her condition in some way, she looked straight at him. Then, they heard a knock. "Come in." Chris entered with her results in his hand. Seeing that, Olivia stopped drinking her soup. "Looks like the results are in." She stared at Ethan, her palms sweaty from the nervousness. She was curious to see Ethan's reaction to the news of her cancer. Would he feel glad about her impending death, or would he feel a little sad for her? Somehow, the anticipation of his reaction gave some meaning to her upcoming death. Ethan silently stared at the paper in Chris' hands. Feeling pressured, Chris forced a smile. "The results are in. Mr. Miller, you have nothing to worry about. I told you she'd be fine. Take a look." "Fine." Olivia frowned. A CT scan might miss the symptoms at the early stages of cancer when even the organs function just fine. But it was odd that the scan picked up nothing when she was in the late stage of stomach cancer. While she was thinking hard, Ethan looked more relieved and grew hostile at the same time. He made his way to her with a grim expression. She squirmed under his gaze, wondering what he had picked up from the results. Anger was not an emotion she expected to see in him after he learned the truth about her failing health. He stood in front of her with eyes that burned in rage. "So," her voice trailed, he suddenly threw the papers at her and bellowed, "Take a look at it yourself." She picked up the CT results that showed no abnormalities. Even her blood test results came back normal, with the red and white blood cell counts hovering around 4. Since she took a Neulasta injection last night, she wasn't surprised by her normal white blood cell count. But the CT scan must have gone wrong somewhere. The top-notch facilities at the hospital couldn't have missed her symptoms either. The cold, hard truth was laid out in front of her. When she was racking her brains, Ethan suddenly leaned forward with both his arms by her side. Olivia Fordham, I underestimated you. He had a mocking look in his eyes. Your acting was perfect. I almost fell for it. Did you think I was faking my illness? She finally put two and two together. He smirked. And what did you think would change? It was a ridiculous accusation. Ethan was the one who hurt her, but he still wanted to drag her through the mud. Taking a deep breath, she refused to fight with him. If he trusted her, he would not demand answers. If he refused to believe in her words, no amount of reasoning would help. True, she had clung onto him and cooked up all sorts of excuses to avoid a divorce. However, she decided to give up on the relationship from the moment she signed the divorce papers. Somehow, Ethan perceived her condition as made up, a ploy to seek attention. Her past self would have chosen to speak up, but she was long past that stage. She looked at him quietly and agreed. That's right, I cannot give up my title of Mrs. Miller. That's why I am faking my illness. My thing with Keith was an act that I put up. Even the suicide attempt was planned. That's my true color, a cunning bitch. Now, do you see me for who I really am? He was taken aback at her no-nonsense admission. After staring at her for a while, he said coldly, why did you turn out this way? That was the last straw that made her blood boil. Puffing and huffing, she clutched the bedsheet and tensed up like a drawn bow. That was all thanks to you. The air froze from the tension. Chris interfered before the situation worsened. Mr. Miller, we're all happy that Mrs. Miller is healthy. Refusing to waste any effort on Olivia, Ethan looked away and said emotionlessly, you'd better behave. In an outburst, she let out her pent-up emotions and threw her bowl of soup at the man who thought he was always right. Behave? Fuck you. He was the one who pursued her and asked for her hand in marriage. His possessiveness forced her to give up on her future and freedom. Not only did he land her in the current mess, he dared to claim that she was faking her illness. The soup dripped from Ethan's tailored, luxurious suit. Seeing red, he gave her a death glare and marched up to her. Sensing a huge fight, Chris jumped in and blocked Ethan with an anxious look. Mr. Miller, the soup must have slipped from her hand. Mrs. Miller, say something. She straightened herself and replied flatly, yeah, it slipped. Chris sounded relieved. Mr. Miller, you heard her. She boldly added, if it hadn't slipped from my hand, it would have hit you right at the back of your head, you asshole. Chris was speechless. Olivia was adding fuel to the fire. Ethan shoved Chris aside and went up to hiss at her through gritted teeth, Olivia Fordham. Fuming, she grabbed a bottle of pills from the headboard and jumped out of bed angrily. Then, she tried to smash the bottle on Ethan's head. Fucking bastard, I'll fight you. Ethan effortlessly caught her weak hands and pinned them behind her back. Defeated in no time, she was red in the face, and her eyes were misty. Ethan felt complicated when he saw this, and he felt more pain than resentment. Finally, he drew a sharp breath to calm his anger. He flung her onto the bed and threatened, remember what you did today. You'd better pray that you don't fall into my hands. Her behavior was no different than waltzing across a field full of landmines. He had to exert a ridiculous amount of self-control to stop himself from grabbing her neck. However, his warning only fanned the flames. She growled, I would never ask you for help even if I had to jump off the 7th floor. Giving her a last glare, he left the room and slammed the door behind him. Then, he took his bodyguards with him. Brent caught up to him and asked, Mr. Miller, aren't you worried that Mrs. Miller might attempt suicide again? Ethan took off his jacket and replied with a serious face, a woman like her would never consider death seriously. I don't want to waste time on her anymore. Brent frowned at Ethan's conclusion. As a bystander, he had a clearer view of the events. No sane person would bet on their life by jumping from the 7th floor, which might result in grave injuries or death. Olivia could have died if Ethan had not gone after Olivia and Kelvin had not placed the inflatable cushions in time. Still, Ethan was adamant that Olivia was playing hard to get, and he wouldn't have it otherwise. Back in the room, Chris requested a nurse to clean up the soupy mess. He flattened the bed and patiently advised Olivia, "Mrs. Miller, you can always talk things out calmly. You shouldn't resolve to extreme methods. Mr. Miller still cares about even stood guard outside your room last night." So, Olivia was in no mood for his nagging. Instead, she questioned, "Mr. Atkins, could there be a mistake in the results?" Chris immediately put on a straight face. "Mrs. Miller, you can insult me as much as you want, but do not question my professionalism. We ran your results through experts in the ON field. How can there be a mistake?" Then, he let out a relieved sigh. "I was shocked to see your low red blood count last night. I even thought you had. Oh, by the way, did you receive any treatment before this?" He took his duty as a doctor seriously and asked an additional question. Recalling the look in Ethan's eyes, Olivia answered quickly, "Number." "That's great, then. It's just a viral infection. You may be discharged after a few days of monitoring at the hospital." Chris felt as if a burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He gave her some more advice and left after she ignored him. Olivia had already done a biopsy which had confirmed her stomach cancer, but the CT scan results this time showed nothing. She had only undergone one chemotherapy session. Although it was very effective and the tumor would shrink, it would not disappear overnight. Evidently, something was off with the results, and only someone from the inside could have tampered with it. The person who did it must have been fearless if they had dared to do it right under Ethan's nose. Who could it be? Was it Marina? Was the incident at the grave not enough that this person had to alter Olivia's checkup results? Although there were no other suspects besides Marina, Olivia still felt that there was something fishy about the whole incident. If it was not Marina, then the real culprit was very terrifying. Many things that had happened over these 2 years may seem like mere coincidences, but it was strange when Olivia thought about it carefully. It was as if someone was controlling her like a puppet. By right, Ethan could get to the bottom of it easily, but she was a liar in his eyes now. He would just think that she was making up stories. Besides, the culprit would be on guard if they investigated openly. Olivia dared not alarm Chris, so she had no choice but to investigate the radiologist privately. Coincidentally, Mercy Hospital was owned by the Atkins family, so Olivia already had a plan. Although news of the previous night's incident had already been hushed, it had reached Calvin's ears. Before Olivia could take the initiative, he came to visit her. Calvin was different from Chris. While Chris had devoted himself to the research and development of medicine, Calvin had joined the hospital and made it to the rank of director in 3 years. Calvin could more or less guess the situation between her and Ethan, but he still smiled dazzlingly. "Olivia, I really didn't expect to see you again so soon. How are you?" "My fever has subsided. Thanks for asking." Lying down on the hospital bed, Olivia looked quite pale and sounded weak when she spoke. Noticing her dry lips, Calvin handed her a glass of warm water and said gently, "Here, drink some water." "Thank you." Olivia took the glass and drank a big gulp of water. In her haste to swallow it, she choked on the water and coughed violently. Calvin put a pillow behind her and patted her back gently. "Don't rush. Drink slowly. You're still the same as ever." Olivia had lost the hostile air she had when she was with Ethan. A look of sympathy came into Calvin's eyes as he asked curiously, "Did you drop out of university back then for Mr. Miller?" Olivia smiled helplessly and said, "It was very foolish of me, wasn't it? I thought I would have a bright future ahead of me, but when I took the leap of faith, I hit rock bottom instead. As long as you're willing to push forward, the opportunities ahead of you are endless," said Calvin gently. "You still have a long way to go." His kindness, as always, gave Olivia some courage. She asked, "Calvin, since we were once classmates, could you do me a favor? Just say the word. I will do my best if it's within my power." Olivia looked around to make sure they were alone before telling him the gist of the situation in a low voice. She had expected Calvin's initial reaction to be defending the hospital's reputation and repudiating her, but he took her checkup report instead. His gentle expression gave way to a sterner one. "Don't worry, Olivia. If anyone from my hospital dares to falsify information, I will punish them accordingly. After Olivia voiced her concerns, Calvin patted her shoulder and said, "It won't do the hospital any good if this incident blows up. I will make sure to deal with this subtly and get back to you with an explanation." Olivia saw no sign of Ethan over the next 2 days, but she had Everly taking care of her while berating Ethan. "Do you think that idiot got possessed? Why does he keep acting up? First, he wants a divorce, then next, he can't accept you dating someone new. Now he's even saying that you're pretending to be sick. I think you should get some holy water to drive away whatever evil is possessing him," ranted Everly. Olivia said calmly, "He's not possessed. He's just crazy." After 2 days of rest, she felt back to normal other than her stomach still causing her problems. After hearing her out, Calvin suggested doing another checkup for her, but she politely declined. She just said she had already done a checkup at another hospital and was currently receiving treatment. Calvin hadn't thought much about it. He took 2 days to conduct investigations and came to give her an answer. "Hey, Everly, you're here too." Calvin was wearing a white doctor's coat with a white shirt underneath. He was also wearing a black necktie and black pants. He looked tall and handsome. Everly stopped cursing Ethan out and whistled while raising an eyebrow. "You really are something. Other people would look like a hospital director wearing that uniform, but you look like you are out to seduce someone." Calvin laughed politely and pointed at the badge on his chest. "You can doubt my looks, but you can't doubt my profession." Everly teased him some more, but Calvin kept a bright smile on his face. "Olivia, you can be discharged if we find no problems after doing another checkup." "Everly, wait for me here. I'll be right back," said Olivia. Everly stuffed a cherry into her mouth and asked, "Do you want me to accompany you?" Olivia waved a hand and said, "It's okay. It's just a routine checkup." With that, she followed Calvin to a checkup room. The previous doctor had already left, and only Calvin and Olivia were in the room. "Have a seat," said Calvin with one arm outstretched. Olivia was anxious and hastily said when she sat down, "It seems like you've found something." Calvin nodded, and his smile disappeared. "You were right. Someone really tampered with the results." "Who was it?" Calvin said solemnly. "That day, all the doctors my brother asked to do your checkup were specialists, but Dr. Thurman, who was in charge of the CT scan, suddenly had diarrhea. He didn't want to waste any of your time, so he handed the task over to Mike Crosby, the assistant intern. When Mike had finished the preparations and was about to send your results over to the analysis department, a nurse summoned him out of the room. It was in that period of time that someone came in and switched your CT scan results. The results Dr. Thurman authorized were indeed normal, but it just wasn't yours." Calvin handed Olivia a glass of warm water and continued explaining, "The person behind this is highly skilled. He or she is technologically savvy. They even blacked out the surveillance cameras. There are only a few people in the radiology department, so it was easy for this person to find an opportunity to infiltrate. Fortunately, the cleaner saw what happened and told me everything." Olivia took a sip of water and put down the glass. Then, she asked, "Was it a man or a woman?" According to the cleaner, the person was wearing a hospital uniform. It was a man. He was very tall, about 6 feet, and had a muscular build. He wore a large pair of sunglasses, so the cleaner couldn't see his face clearly. "Then, was there anything that stood out about him?" Calvin nodded and said, "Yes. He has a mole on his right ear. Perhaps he was feeling guilty because he left in a hurry and nearly slipped on the wet floor the cleaner had just mopped." She saw an eagle tattoo under his sleeve. She hadn't thought much about it at that moment and only realized something was off after the incident. "We screen our employees before we hire them. The hospital usually won't hire people with tattoos on their arms." Olivia stared down at the glass of water and groaned. "We can't find him based just on a tattoo." "Don't worry, Olivia. I've already sent the blackout footage to a professional hacker. The original clip should be recovered soon. I'll tell you as soon as it's done." Olivia said gratefully, "Thank you, Calvin." "Don't thank me. It was our fault anyway. If word about this spreads, our hospital's reputation would be ruined. Olivia replied, someone was targeting me, so it has nothing to do with the hospital. I won't tell a soul. I hope that you can keep this a secret too. Don't even tell Chris. I don't want to alert anyone. Calvin nodded in understanding. Let's put this behind us for now. I suggest that you do another checkup. I'll personally run the tests this time. If there's any problem, we can start solving it earlier too. Olivia smiled and said, it's no big deal. Don't worry. Okay then. These machines are radioactive, so you shouldn't be exposed to them too frequently in such a short period of time. If you want to have another checkup in a few months, then you can contact me anytime. Sure. Calvin smiled warmly and said, you're well enough to be discharged now. I've already asked someone to deal with the procedures. By the way, let's exchange phone numbers. Olivia added his number to her contacts on WhatsApp. Calvin walked her out of the hospital and handed her the discharge documents he'd prepared. Then, they bid each other goodbye. After Everly teased her and Calvin again, they finally left. In the car, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the incident. It definitely involved an insider at the hospital. The person couldn't have executed his plan so flawlessly unless he was familiar with the ins and outs of the place. Nevertheless, they didn't have solid evidence. Since Calvin didn't want to make a big fuss about it for the sake of the hospital's reputation, he couldn't investigate every department either. There were more than 1,000 employees at the hospital, including all the doctors, nurses, housemen, and part-timers combined. How was he supposed to investigate all of them? The only clue he was left with was the surveillance footage. If it could be restored, then they would be able to catch the person who'd tampered with her report. Olivia pinched the bridge of her nose, clearly exhausted. Everly, who'd been talking for a long time without getting an answer, couldn't stop herself from tapping Olivia's shoulder. What's the matter? Are you thinking about that douchebag again? She asked. Olivia recalled the furious look in Ethan's eyes before he'd left. Their relationship was ruined, and all she prayed for now was to have nothing to do with him ever again. No, she answered. She looked at the scenery passing by outside the window, wondering when Calvin would find an answer. However, just after 2 days of rest, she received a call from the hospital. Ms. Fordham, Mr. Fordham's in critical condition. His heart rate suddenly declined, and his breathing is getting weaker. We've just taken him for emergency treatment. Please come as soon as possible. In the hospital corridor, Olivia waited outside the operating theater anxiously while a nurse tried her best to comfort her. Ms. Fordham, you have to be prepared for the worst. Judging by Mr. Fordham's condition, he might not. Olivia dug her nails into her palm and said hoarsely, I know. The nurse sighed and said helplessly, I know it's really been hard for you. As she looked at the young woman, who was around the same age as her own daughter, the nurse couldn't help but feel sorry that Olivia had to carry such a heavy weight on her shoulders at such a young age. The nurse knew that Olivia was married, but she'd never seen her husband around. Olivia was always waiting out here alone. Her thin frame only increased the nurse's concern for her. The doors of the operating theater opened, and Olivia rushed forward at once. Doctor, how is he? Olivia's heart was pounding violently as she gripped her sleeve tightly. She was terrified of hearing the worst. Fortunately, the nurses noticed his condition very quickly, and we were able to save him in time. Olivia, I won't keep it from you. Your father is in a very dangerous state, and we need the best brain specialist, Leo, to perform brain surgery for him. Otherwise, we might not be able to save him next time. Olivia's heart sank. She wanted to find Leo more than anyone else. Alas, she didn't have a wide social circle. Keith had helped her look for Leo before, but to no avail. When Jeff was wheeled out, she saw how weak he looked with his eyes tightly shut. She called out, Dad. However, it was like throwing a pebble down a well because she received no answer. One of Jeff's hands, which wasn't covered by the blanket, looked thin and wrinkled with age. He seemed to have aged a lot over the last 2 short years. Except for the indwelling needle, The rest of the back of his hand was just loose, sagging skin. It looked nothing like the hand that had held hers when they'd walked home last time. Olivia leaned against him and wept uncontrollably. She said in a choked voice, "Dad, wake up and look at me, won't you?" No matter what he'd done to other people, he'd never mistreated her. Olivia couldn't just stand by and watch him suffer like this. A thought popped up in her mind. The day she'd tried to jump off, Ethan had said that he could find Leo. Based on his wide network of connections and wealth, it wasn't surprising that he was capable of finding Leo. If she hadn't been on the brink of death, Ethan would never have told her. She knew how much Ethan hated her and her father, but she had no other way of saving Jeff. She'd never thought that she'd have to go and beg Ethan so soon after she'd just decided to cut ties with him 2 days ago. After drying her tears and making sure Jeff was all right, Olivia asked Brent about Ethan's whereabouts. She then took a taxi to Silver. In the decadent club, scantily dressed female dancers moved around seductively. In every corner, men and women kissed scandalously, and loud voices came from the booths. However, the fun and excitement had nothing to do with Olivia. She walked quickly toward a private room deeper inside the club. Ethan usually didn't like places like this and would choose a quiet spot even for a gathering with friends. Brent opened the door to the private room for her. The luxurious private room could accommodate more than 100 people. Even with so many men and women inside, Olivia still spotted Ethan among the crowd at first glance. He was leaning against a leather armchair with his eyes shut. He looked very out of place in the rowdy room. With his eyes closed and his sharp gaze hidden, he looked harmless. Brian Moore, a dashing man dressed in gray casual clothes, sat next to Ethan, soaking his feet in a tub. A furry blindfold was hanging around his neck. Other people had either a glass of whiskey or Armand de Brignac in front of them, but he had a thermos filled with herbal tea. One of them seemed to treat the place like a hotel, while the other treated it like a foot spa. Olivia watched as a woman in skimpy clothes walked to Ethan and boldly tried to kiss him. Smelling her pungent perfume, Ethan jerked awake. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a pair of fiery red lips. As if by instinct, he shoved her away mercilessly. "Ah!" The woman shrieked and sprawled on the floor right in front of Olivia. Her short skirt rode up and exposed the sexy thong she was wearing underneath. The men standing around started whistling. Olivia felt uneasy being in a place like this. She looked up with a flustered expression and met Ethan's gaze. His eyes were calm, but there was a hint of mockery in them. He'd just played hard to get a few days ago, but she'd shown up in front of him so soon. It just proved he'd been right about her. He wondered what tricks she'd use this time since she'd tried to commit suicide the last time. Olivia understood the look in his eyes, but with her father on the brink of death, she had no choice other than to ask him for help. Even if she'd only be humiliated by approaching him, she had no other way out. The bystanders had noticed her, but other than Brian, nobody else knew that she was Ethan's ex-wife. A woman with a hot body looked Olivia up and down, then teased her while chewing her gum. "Hey, ma'am. Are you in the wrong room?" Olivia thought about the time Everly had joked about how girls nowadays wore spaghetti strap tops under their coats, whereas Olivia wore a sweater underneath hers. In the room full of trendy people, she was the only one wearing a thick down jacket, a knitted hat, and a scarf. Olivia ignored the woman and looked at Ethan directly. Mr. Miller, can we talk privately? Can't you see that there's a girl who's prettier than you already lying on the floor? Do you want to be next?" The woman teased her relentlessly. Ethan looked at Olivia and said coldly, "Come here." His words were like a slap in that woman's face. Olivia made her way through the crowd with everybody watching her and stopped in front of Ethan. Brian, who was soaking his feet, looked very comfortable. His forehead was beaded with sweat from the warm water. He was still as health-conscious as always. The scent of wormwood masked the smell of alcohol and perfume. It also chased away the smell of cigarettes and made Olivia feel a lot better. Brian greeted her first. "Hey, long time no see, Olivia. Want to soak your feet?" Olivia turned down his unusual invitation. No thanks, Mr. Moore. Brian immediately started lecturing her about the benefits of soaking one's feet. It improves blood circulation and metabolism. It also helps relieve insomnia and reduce high blood pressure. What's more, it improves cardiovascular health. You don't look very well, so you should soak your feet. I've just made an improvement to the prescription. Ethan interrupted Brian's rambling and pulled the blindfold over the latter's eyes impatiently. Go to sleep. The onlookers watched Olivia curiously, wondering who she was. Why did she seem so close to Ethan and Brian? However, she looked unfamiliar to all of them. Ethan sat there with his legs slightly spread, looking extremely intimidating. He glanced over at her mildly and asked, "Why are you here?" Ethan's impression was still the same as the last time, when she'd thrown a pot of porridge at him a few days ago. She'd been furious and crazy, and she'd looked just like an angry cat. Now, SFIE was the exact opposite of that. Standing with her head bowed, she anxiously shifted from one foot to the other. Olivia tried to overcome the discomfort and awkwardness she felt under his gaze. Softly, she said, "I want to ask you for a favor." A laugh escaped his mouth as he sat with his legs crossed, plucking out a cigarette from a box. She knew he was mocking her. "What do you want now?" he asked. Jason Yates, a rich youngster, stood not far away from them. Somehow, he was able to discern the slight difference in the way Ethan treated her. As he approached them, he said, "There's no one in this world who wouldn't want to ask Mr. Miller for help. Young lady, is this the attitude you should have when you're asking someone for help? Hurry and light Mr. Miller's cigarette for him." Jason ushered Olivia to stand beside Ethan as the latter leaned in his seat, looking as lackadaisical as ever. Apart from the tit-for-tat exchanges they'd had in the past 2 years, he'd used to be more polite and had more self-restraint. He'd never smoked in front of her. Now, though, his collar was open, and the top 2 buttons were unbuttoned. The dim light emphasized his already prominent facial features, making him appear all the more formidable. As Olivia busied herself to find a lighter, she met Ethan's deep eyes, which seemed to be judging her. She couldn't care less what he thought of her and proceeded to bend over with one knee on the couch. She leaned forward, ready to light the cigarette. Since she and Ethan were not of equal standing, she was forced to be humble around him. The light from the flame of the lighter cast a flickering glow on his face. As he lowered his eyes, a hint of a smile hung at the corner of his lips for some unknown reason. "I seem to recall that you once said you'd rather jump from the 7th floor of a building than come to me for help," he said. That sentence was like a humiliating slap. She hadn't expected her father to get caught up in something like this and hence need Ethan's help. Still, she wasn't in the mood to guess what he thought of her, so she simply bent lower toward him. In a humble voice, she said, "You're a magnanimous man, Mr. Miller. I'm sure you wouldn't be mad at something so trivial." The gears in Jason's mind started turning. Ethan had never let any woman close to him, but this woman seemed to be the only exception. Although she was dressed a little too modestly, she had a pretty face, which could suit Ethan's taste. Hurriedly, Jason poured 3 glasses of whiskey for Olivia and rapped his fingers on the table. "This is the way things work." Olivia furrowed her brows. Half a glass of this was enough to make her pass out, yet he wanted her to down 3 of them. She glanced at Ethan, who then propped a hand under his chin and said nonchalantly, "What excuse are you going to come up with this time? That you're feeling uncomfortable or that you're sick to the point of no return?" The sneer on his lips was as clear as day. He knew that she had a low alcohol tolerance, but he enjoyed making things tough for her. Perhaps this was him taking revenge on her. Olivia felt her heart clench when she recalled the times he'd forbidden her from touching alcohol. Things were different for them now. Ethan sat there with his chin tilted slightly upward. The air of arrogance and prestige he exuded was evident to anyone around him, and it ultimately put a wall between them. To him, she had been a puny and powerless wielding from the beginning. Now that she'd thought things through, Olivia's mind zeroed in on saving her father. Her life and dignity were nothing in the face of saving him. She raised one of the glasses into the air and downed the drink in one long gulp. She didn't drink often and was clueless about the quality of the whiskey. All she knew was that her throat was on fire after she finished it. Pain. Not only did it burn her throat, but it also made her stomach hurt. Her clothes were thick, trapping heat and soaking her in her own sweat. Her stomach was torturing her as it churned like a whirlpool inside of her. She pressed one hand on her stomach, then reached for the second glass with the other. Someone handed her a warm glass of milk. If you can't drink, then don't. Alcohol is bad for your health anyway. Here, have a glass of milk instead. You'll feel better after having it. Brian's voice was soft and gentle, similar to how a brother would speak to his younger sibling. He knew who she was and was really kind to her. Olivia smiled at him gratefully, but before she could thank him, Ethan cut in, reminding her, "You have 2 glasses left." His voice was as cold as his gaze. Brian furrowed his brows at Ethan. He knew how much Olivia meant to Ethan, and if the latter took things too far, not only would his actions hurt Olivia, but he would make himself miserable too. Fine. Olivia didn't hesitate as she reached for the second glass of whiskey. The look on her face said that there was no turning back, and she finished the drink in one go. Her stomach felt like it had been punctured by thousands of blades. Having drunk too much alcohol too quickly, Olivia couldn't help but feel like the world was spinning around her. All of a sudden, she collapsed. She thought that she'd crash onto the table. She'd never expected someone's arms to pick her up instead. Ethan held her in his arms and left the room in a hurry. Olivia was already in a daze as she mumbled to him, "Whiskey. One more left." Ethan tossed her into the backseat of the car. His eyes burned with rage as he looked at her. "Just what are you trying to do? Haven't you fooled around enough?" Olivia thought she saw stars when she fell heavily onto the seat. She didn't care about anything at this point. In a kneeling position, she reached out to Ethan and tugged at his sleeves like a pouting child. She said sluggishly, "I must find Leo. He'll perform the craniotomy for my dad. I'll pay back what my dad owes you." Ethan lowered his gaze to Olivia and noticed a blush had crept across her previously pale face. She was trying her best to stay conscious despite being drunk. "You can kill me, beat me, or do anything you want to me. I'll pay you back. Just let my dad go. He's my only family, please," she mumbled. Ethan smirked at her in contempt. "You, paying me back? What else do you have besides your life?" Loosening her grip on him, Olivia stared at him, completely helpless. "What exactly do you want me to do to make you satisfied? No matter what you do, my sister's already dead. I don't want you to die, but I won't let you live a happy life either. I'll only feel like life is worth living when I see you wallowing in misery. Am I clear? You're so cruel." Tears streamed down her cheeks, making her look pitiful. The sight of her in such a state made him feel slightly sorry for her. Much to his surprise, he couldn't feel any hint of joy when he saw her tears. Annoyed, he loosened his tie and stretched an arm around her, forcefully pulling her into his embrace. She was already in a daze, but the impact as she crashed into his sturdy chest made her even dizzier. Just as she started to speak again, she noticed Ethan's piercing eyes looking into hers. Without any warning, he leaned in and pressed his lips against hers, snuffing out any sound she'd been about to make. He pressed on, letting his tongue explore and dominate every inch of her mouth. He was overcome with restlessness. He'd thought that he didn't want to see her happy and yearned to let her burn in hell, and yet when he saw how she was struggling in torment, he realized that he wasn't even the slightest bit happy. "Add her a warm glass of milk. If you can't drink, then don't. Alcohol is bad for your health anyway. Here, have a glass of milk instead. You'll feel better after having it." Brian's voice was soft and gentle, similar to how a brother would speak to his younger sibling. He knew who she was and was really kind to her. Olivia smiled at him gratefully, but before she could thank him, Ethan cut in, reminding her, "You have 2 glasses left." His voice was as cold as his gaze. Brian furrowed his brows at Ethan. He knew how much Olivia meant to Ethan, and if the latter took things too far, not only would his actions hurt Olivia, but he would make himself miserable too. "Fine." Olivia didn't hesitate as she reached for the second glass of whiskey. The look on her face said that there was no turning back, and she finished the drink in one go. Her stomach felt like it had been punctured by thousands of blades. Having drunk too much alcohol too quickly, Olivia couldn't help but feel like the world was spinning around her. All of a sudden, she collapsed. She thought that she'd crash onto the table. She'd never expected someone's arms to pick her up instead. Ethan held her in his arms and left the room in a hurry. Olivia was already in a daze as she mumbled to him, "Whiskey. One more left." Ethan tossed her into the backseat of the car. His eyes burned with rage as he looked at her. "Just what are you trying to do? Haven't you fooled around enough?" Olivia thought she saw stars when she fell heavily onto the seat. She didn't care about anything at this point. In a kneeling position, she reached out to Ethan and tugged at his sleeves like a pouting child. She said sluggishly, "I must find Leo. He'll perform the craniotomy for my dad. I'll pay back what my dad owes you." Ethan lowered his gaze to Olivia and noticed a blush had crept across her previously pale face. She was trying her best to stay conscious despite being drunk. "You can kill me, beat me, or do anything you want to me. I'll pay you back. Just let my dad go. He's my only family, please," she mumbled. Ethan smirked at her in contempt. "You, paying me back? What else do you have besides your life?" Loosening her grip on him, Olivia stared at him, completely helpless. "What exactly do you want me to do to make you satisfied? No matter what you do, my sister's already dead. I don't want you to die, but I won't let you live a happy life either. I'll only feel like life is worth living when I see you wallowing in misery. Am I clear?" "You're so cruel." Tears streamed down her cheeks, making her look pitiful. The sight of her in such a state made him feel slightly sorry for her. Much to his surprise, he couldn't feel any hint of joy when he saw her tears. Annoyed, he loosened his tie and stretched an arm around her, forcefully pulling her into his embrace. She was already in a daze, but the impact as she crashed into his sturdy chest made her even dizzler. Just as she started to speak again, she noticed Ethan's piercing eyes looking into hers. Without any warning, he leaned in and pressed his lips against hers, snuffing out any sound she'd been about to make. He pressed on, letting his tongue explore and dominate every inch of her mouth. He was overcome with restlessness. He'd thought that he didn't want to see her happy and yearned to let her burn in hell, and yet when he saw how she was struggling in torment, he realized that he wasn't even the slightest bit happy. All he felt was a cold hand close around his heart, strangling and suffocating him. As his lips touched hers, he caught her familiar scent. Only then did he manage to calm down. Both of them were like a tangled mess. The more she struggled against him, the tighter his grip on her became. His hands moved swiftly to pull down the zip of her down jacket, but Olivia realized what he was doing and pushed her hands on his chest. "No," she yelped, unwillingness written all over her face, but it only made Ethan more angry. He stared into her eyes and repeated the words she'd said not long ago, "You said I could do anything I wanted to you." Ethan's words were harsh, but Olivia was left with no other choice. She removed her hands from his chest, and his hands moved to her clothes. However, when he took her jacket off, he realized that she was wearing a sweater and another layer of thermal clothing under it. Ethan furrowed his brows in confusion. "Are you an old lady? Why are you wearing so many layers of clothes?" Blushing, Olivia bit her lip and replied, "I'm afraid of the cold." Suddenly, Ethan realized that she must be extremely thin to look fit even under so many layers of clothes. As his palm rested on the small of her back, he could feel her spine. It was as if there was no flesh to separate her skin from her bones, and he wondered how she became so thin. The lustful thoughts he'd had just seconds ago vanished, replaced by a sheen of guilt. Suddenly, Olivia glared at him, as though she'd only just realized what was happening. In a tone that made it abundantly clear that she wasn't happy, she questioned, "Aren't you afraid that Marina will find out about you doing this to me? Don't forget that we're divorced." Ethan's voice returned to its cool, indifferent tone. "It's none of your business. I agree with your earlier suggestion. From this day forth, you will pay me back on behalf of your father." Quickly, Olivia asked, "About Leo. I'll find him." Now that Ethan had promised to help her, Olivia could finally heave a sigh of relief. His gaze was dangerously locked on her as he said, "And you have to be on call whenever I need you." Olivia was rather surprised to hear him say that. His fingers brushed lightly over her cheeks as he teased, "I realized something. Whenever I touch you, you look like you're going to die. But I still yearn for you." His voice trailed off as he stared into her eyes. "So what better way to torture you than this? Am I right?" Enduring the searing pain in her stomach, Olivia asked him, "Will you regret torturing me like this one day? The only thing I know for sure is that I can only smile when you're in pain." Olivia had never imagined that their relationship would end up like this. She asked Ethan to drive her back to her apartment. When they reached her place, he asked, "Aren't you going to invite me upstairs for some coffee?" It was obvious that he wanted to finish what he'd started in the car. Olivia had no reason to refuse him since Eve wasn't home and the apartment was all hers. After opening the door, she darted into the washroom, not even bothering to switch on the lights or change into her indoor slippers. She emptied the contents of her stomach and felt much more relieved and clear-headed now. Suddenly, she felt an excruciating pain in her stomach and realized that the alcohol had only just started showing its full effects. Breaking out in a cold sweat, she curled up on the ground, trying to bear the pain in silence, but it seeped across every inch of her body, to the point that even simply breathing felt agonizing. Her head thumped, and she wandered in and out of consciousness, wondering if she was going to die soon. She bit her lip to stop herself from making any sound. Ethan waited outside the washroom for a long time, but Olivia made no move to come out. In the end, he knocked on the door and asked, "Olivia, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she forced the words from her mouth. "Give me a minute, I'll come out after cleaning up." Never in his wildest dreams would Ethan have suspected that she was terminally ill. After all, she'd just had a checkup a few days ago. He walked away, thinking that she was simply embarrassed to face him. Behind the door, Olivia was curled up in a corner with her arms pressed against her stomach as if to numb the pain. Now, even the slightest movement caused her immense pain, making her regret her rash decision to down those 2 glasses of whiskey just now. Ethan took a furtive glance around the apartment. It wasn't big, but he could feel Olivia's presence in every corner. When he noticed the baby crib in her room, he remembered that it was the only thing she'd taken with her when she'd left him. As the realization washed over him, his heart turned into a jumbled mess. After seeing her jump off the building that day, he'd come to realize one thing. He'd followed after her without hesitation, which made him understand that he couldn't stop loving her no matter how much he hated her. His love and hate were intertwined. They fused into a prickly bramble full of thorns, coiling tightly around the two of them. It was as though the more he pushed her off into the dark, the closer he got to the edge of a cliff himself. Ethan picked up a soft toy on the bed. Olivia had always hugged it to make herself sleep for countless nights in the past 2 years. If only that incident hadn't happened, he would have been a good husband to Olivia and a good father to their child. Every time her name left his lips, he could still feel the love he felt for her. He simply couldn't make himself leave her for good. Meanwhile, Olivia finally felt better after some time. She slowly pushed herself off the ground and walked to the living room. She'd half expected that Ethan would have left, given that he was someone who valued time. Yet when she raised her head to look around the house, she spotted him on the balcony. Sparks from a cigarette flickered as he held it between 2 fingers. It seemed that his smoking addiction had worsened. Olivia was astonished that he was still here. Was he waiting to pick up where they'd stopped earlier? A shadow fell across her face at that thought, and she went to get herself a glass of water to clear her throat. After that, she dragged her feet on the floor as she approached him. "Should we do it here or on the bed?" she asked in a cool and distant tone, as though they were talking about work. Ethan looked up from the cigarette to stare at her sickly face, then exhaled slowly, forming a white puff of smoke in the air. Do I seem like a pervert to you? I'll go to sleep if you're not thinking of doing it, Olivia told him blankly. She secretly thanked her lucky stars that she'd been able to escape it. All she wanted was to have a good rest. She went into her room and closed the door behind her. Ethan tapped at the cigarette lightly to make the ashes fall as he watched her disappear behind the door. This was exactly what he'd wanted. But why was he upset? Was it because there was no longer a shine in her eyes when she looked at him? He opened the door to see her curled up in bed. Her bed was full of plushies, so she had to curl herself up to fit on the bed. That was the only way she felt safe. Venturing into the dark bedroom, Ethan stood beside the bed, looking at Olivia. However, she was too tired to acknowledge him. Thanks to the alcohol, she managed to doze off easily. The next day, she woke up to find Ethan sleeping on the bed in the master bedroom. Surprisingly, he went straight into the bathroom to shower without mocking or ridiculing her. The doorbell rang, and she walked to open the door in her pajamas. Keith stood at the door with some bags of New Year's goods in his hands. It's New Year's soon, so I brought something over for you. There's no need to. Before Olivia could finish her sentence, the door to the bathroom opened. Ethan had been expecting Brent to send some clothes over for him, so he walked straight out of the bathroom. He turned to look at the open door, only to find Keith standing there. Raising an eyebrow in question, he said to Olivia, "It seems like we have company." Olivia was still in her pajamas, whereas Ethan was wrapped in only a towel. No matter how one looked at it, they looked just like a couple who'd been married for years. Keith was neither blind nor stupid. He set the goods down and left, dispirited. Olivia didn't care to explain, which only convinced Keith that he'd guessed her situation correctly. Nevertheless, this was for the best. Ethan tossed a glance at the goods on the ground. Am I not generous enough to you? $10 billion for their divorce was considered sky high already. Olivia answered, I'll give these to the old guy who collects the trash in our area. Ethan grunted. Does he come here often? He visited once when I had a fever. There won't be a next time. Ethan's harsh voice matched his stern message. Stunned, it took Olivia a moment before she replied, okay. When Ethan finished packing his things and got ready to leave, she couldn't hold back and asked, about Leo. I'll contact you when I get an answer, he said, closing the door behind me. It was pretty easy for him to search for someone. Her father could be saved. Olivia slumped on the couch and let her head fall back against the headrest. Closing her eyes, she heaved a sigh of relief. In the afternoon, Keith received a call from his parents. His father, Frank Rogers, told him that he could have the opportunity to further his studies abroad. He could then take over the position of head of the hospital after that. Sorry, Dad, but I'm not thinking of going overseas for now. It's a golden opportunity. I tried so hard to get you into this. There are only 3 spots for it in the entire country, Frank answered. Keith smiled mockingly in response, saying, this chance should go to Ethan then. I don't know what happened between you and him, but he was even willing to set aside his status to inform me about this. Even if you don't think about yourself, you should at least think about your siblings. Keith had always been compliant with his parents, but this time, he fell silent. Noticing that his son was upset, Frank sighed helplessly. You've heard of Oakland Hospital, right? Ethan Miller offered to cooperate with us on that project, the one everyone's been talking about in Aldenvine. I'm sure you know what that means. I know, Keith said curtly. Failing to get a proper response from his son, Frank finally asked, what's making you stay? Keith stood up from his seat, arms behind his back, as he looked out the window at the hall bustling with nurses and patients. He let out a sigh and explained, I want to send someone off one last time. Frank was at a loss for words at this point. Keith had always been a good child to him, and, as a good father, he didn't want to poke his nose into his son's private life. However, he couldn't afford to offend the Miller family. On top of that, Ethan was someone he respected as well. Keith recalled what he'd seen this morning and remembered how Ethan had been so possessive of Olivia during the banquet that night. Even after their divorce, Ethan still wasn't willing to let her off the hook so easily. Besides, Keith knew that if he got closer to Olivia, it would cause trouble for her. With this in mind, he closed his eyes and eventually said, "Dad, I'll accept the offer to study overseas. I won't let you down." "Good. I'll make the necessary arrangements for you." Olivia had finally gotten over the worst of days, and her life was starting to take some semblance of normality again. Early the next morning, she went to visit her father at the hospital. When she reached, she saw the nurse wiping Jeff's face with a handkerchief. She quickly took the cloth from the nurse, saying, "Allow me." The nurse didn't object and handed it over to Olivia. Then, Olivia noticed 2 bouquets of gladioli on the table beside the bed. "Did someone come to visit?" she asked. "Yes. Dr. Rogers was here. I was cleaning up the room when I heard him talking to Mr. Fordham's attending physician. He's going abroad for further studies, so we won't get to see him here for quite some time." Olivia froze in the middle of wringing the handkerchief dry. She understood the real reason he was leaving. "I see." The nurse didn't notice the change in Olivia's expression and merely told her, "Dr. Rogers is a good person." "I know. If you're thinking of starting a family, I think he's a pretty." Stunned, Olivia stopped what she was doing and said sternly, "Madam, you've crossed the line. I want to talk to my father alone. Please leave." "All right." The nurse closed the door gently and left. As usual, Olivia patiently wiped Jeff's body and trimmed his hair and nails. Had it not been for the electrocardiogram displaying his even heartbeat, she would have thought that he'd left her for good. Compared to the snowstorm before, the weather was great today, so she pushed the curtain away to let the sun's warm rays shine into the room. "Dad, I won't be able to stay with you for long. If you don't wake up soon, you might never see me again." "Oh right, Ethan and I are divorced now." Olivia's voice was gentle as she spoke to her father, updating him on her life. Sunlight fell on her face as she smiled. "He wasn't very kind to me these 2 years, but he's been quite generous since our divorce. He's given me what he should, including a house, a car, and some shares. I'm filthy rich now. I remember you telling me after Mom left that life should have its regrets, because only then would we learn to appreciate things. Since then, I've treasured everything and everyone around me, but, in the end, I haven't managed to keep anyone by my side," she continued. "I've got some good news too, Dad. I heard that Mr. Crosby has decided to auction our house. I'll win the auction and get our house back. After Leo treats you and you recover, you live there. I'm sorry I have to leave you alone and for not being able to send you off." Olivia talked on and on until it was dusk, yet Jeff showed no signs of walding up. She forced out a laugh helplessly. "Just as I'd expected. Miracles only happen in storybooks." On her way home, Olivia noticed a piece of news titled "President of Miller Group Customizes Priceless Wedding Dress for Fiancé." There was a picture of the dress, Millie Estelli, attached as well. To be honest, Olivia didn't mind Ethan remarrying or having children with someone else, but the fact that he was giving his new wife this dress was heartbreaking. There were so many wedding dresses in the world to choose from. Why did it have to be this one? It took her back to that day 3 years ago. She'd just taken a shower and was lying lazily on the couch. She'd been watching a high-end luxury brand's press conference on TV. Pointing to one of the dresses displayed, she'd exclaimed, "Wow! I just love the way Emmy designs her dresses. All of them are special. They're elegant and stylish, but not flamboyant at all. It's a pity that we didn't hold a wedding ceremony." Ethan had pulled Olivia into his arms out of habit. "Who said you could only wear a dress like that during a wedding ceremony? I'll give you the most unique dress of all, Liv." A month after that, Olivia had come across a draft of a gown design on the table in the study. There had been other designs, wedged in the sketchbook too. Seeing them, she'd realized that the reason Ethan had been working late into the night was because he'd been designing a dress for her. "Do you like this one?" Ethan asked. He had appeared out of nowhere and hugged her from behind. He rested his chin gently on her shoulder as he spoke, making the atmosphere ever so romantic and heartwarming. I like everything you draw. I've discussed things with the designer. The dress will take 3 years from material selection to completion. Can you wait until then? I'll wait for it even if it takes 30 years, Olivia said. There are so many diamonds on it. Why don't we call it Milia Stelli? Sure, it's all up to you. Then, I'll wear this dress only for you. Olivia could still clearly recall the time they'd made this promise. She just needed to close her eyes to remember the smile that had spread on his lips that day. His gentle eyes shone like stars in the midnight sky, too. Now, she didn't need to wait for the dress anymore. All her waiting had brought her was seeing him give the dress to his new fiancé. Olivia recomposed herself before she headed home. Eve had packed her things in a hurry and moved to her house yesterday. When Olivia arrived home, Eve was humming and waving the spatula in the air as she prepared food in the kitchen. The years she'd spent saving money to pay that douchebag's bills had made her develop excellent cooking skills. As the broth boiled in the pot, she busied herself with the ingredients, mixing them together step by step until the dish's aromatic fragrance filled the entire room. It warmed Olivia's heart and made her feel as though she'd just climbed back from the depths of the underworld. The aroma of the food helped improve her mood. It dissipated some of the sadness that had been weighing her down. After stirring the broth with a ladle, Eve took a spoonful out of the pot, blew into it a couple of times, and tasted it. This isn't bad. Liv will love this. I like anything you cook, Olivia said as she entered the kitchen. Eve was the only person by her side now. You're back. How's your father? The usual. Don't worry. He'll get well soon. After all, you already donated all that money today. What a shame, too. You're too generous. Olivia smiled. You truly are a money grubber. One needs to be alive to spend that money. No matter how much money we have, it's useless when we die. It's better to use it to help others. You're right. That money came from an asshole anyway, so you should spend it however you want. Otherwise, it'd go to that scheming bitch, said Eve. She continued, I'll never forget that he was the one who kicked me down the hill. As of late, I even dream of kicking him all the time. Oh, Eve. Olivia couldn't hold back a smile. Freeze. A camera appeared in Everly's hands out of nowhere. Stay still. This is the smile I want to see. Olivia covered her face with her hands. You know that I don't like taking photos. I have to take more photos of you while you're still in good shape. That way, I'll have something to remember you by in case you leave. Everly's voice trailed off. Olivia then took the camera from her and smiled softly. Then you must put on some filters for me. After all, women like to look pretty all the time. I'll have to smile more so that you'll feel better when you see these photos in the future. It was the night of the charity dinner, which had been fully organized and managed by the Crosby family. The Crosbys had announced that 10% of the money from the auction would be sent to charity. However, everyone knew the truth: the Crosbys were facing some financial difficulties and were trying to earn some cash by selling off some of their items. Those in Mr. Crosby Sr.'s circle knew that he had an eye for invaluable collectibles, yet they kept quiet about it. He'd liked hoarding valuables since he'd been young, so there were bound to be lots of treasures hidden in his house. It wasn't every day that one got to see him selling his prized possessions, and those who knew him had decided to attend the dinner as soon as they'd received the invitation. Even those without much money came over to watch the show. The word on the street was that the Fordham residence was going to be auctioned too. Olivia and Everly arrived just in time. The latter poked her head out of the car window to take a look before saying, "You go ahead and head upstairs. I'll park the car and meet you there. Save me a spot in the front row." All right. Everly had never attended something like this and thought that they could help each other grab a seat. The truth was, the seats were usually arranged for the guests in advance at events like this. There were two ways the seating arrangement was determined, either according to one's social status or based on the amount of money one had to offer. Fortunately, Olivia had asked Everly to settle the donation before they came, so she already had a seat reserved for her. She couldn't simply sit wherever she wanted. Unfortunately, as Olivia neared the entrance, She realized she'd forgotten the invitation when the guard stopped her from entering. "Miss, do you have a letter of invitation with you?" The guard wasn't trying to make things difficult for her. It was just that he'd never seen anyone wear a down jacket to an event like this. The dress code usually consisted of gowns and suits. On top of that, he could see that her down jacket was patched up in some places. "Frankly," Olivia said, "it's with my friend. I'm sorry, but you have to wait for your friend before you two can enter together." Since it was a private event, Olivia understood that the guard was merely doing his job. Despite getting some looks from some of the guests that were entering the building, she straightened her back, trying to remain calm and composed. It was at this moment that Marina arrived with Callista, who had an arm hooked around the former's. Olivia could hear Callista's voice from afar as she said, "Marina, I saw the dress in the interview. They say there are 3,650 diamonds inlaid on it and that every diamond is a symbol of Mr. Miller's love for you. I truly envy the love you two have for each other." Olivia pressed her fingers hard into her palms, but she didn't feel the pain. She had always thought that Ethan had designed Milia Stelli for her and that all the diamonds were just part of the design. Now she knew that it was to commemorate his and Marina's love. Marina was surrounded by a group of women in ostentatious clothes. When her gaze met Olivia's, she coolly looked away, not wanting to have anything to do with Olivia. She didn't want anyone to know about Ethan and Olivia's past. Callista, on the other hand, was a completely different case. Olivia had upset everyone when they'd had a meal together that day. Besides, the Fordhams had finally gone bankrupt as well. With Marina by her side, Callista looked down on Olivia even more. "Isn't this our class genius? Why are you dressed so sloppily? When I saw you from afar, I thought you were a beggar." Callista mocked her. The guard chose to speak at this inappropriate moment. "Mrs. Miller, do you know this woman? She doesn't have an invitation with her, but if you know her, you can go in together." "I don't," Marina said curtly. Callista tried to make things worse by telling the guard, "You should have your eyes checked. Don't simply allow penniless people to sneak their way into an event like this." Callista added, "The New Year's coming, so maybe she was trying to steal something after getting inside. I'm sure you can't afford it if something goes missing." The guard nodded repeatedly at Callista. "I understand now. Thank you for your reminder, ma'am." Callista and Marina rolled their eyes at him and finally entered the building. Just as the guard was about to ask Olivia to leave, Brent, who'd come out for a smoke, saw them. He immediately stepped in to stop the guard. Only then did the guard allow Olivia to go inside. "Mrs. Miss Fordham, shall I escort you inside?" Brent addressed Olivia as respectfully as usual. "There's no need. I'm waiting for a friend. She's here." Olivia had just spotted a woman in a flaming red fur coat. She wore nude stockings underneath and high heels, making her look like an ostrich on fire. All of a sudden, Olivia didn't want to admit knowing someone like her. It had never occurred to her that Everly was late because she was changing in the car. Everly walked over with a pair of exaggerated glasses on her face and an overwhelming scent of perfume surrounding her. Olivia turned away from the horrendous sight and started to leave. "Nope, I got the wrong person. I'll head inside now. Liv, wait for me," Everly called after Olivia. She approached Brent, stopped right before him, and removed her shades. "Did you piss Liv off again?" Brent was never one to comment on women's clothing, but this time. "Do you think Treasure Trove is a nightclub? Are you going to dance in this?" Everly was a short-tempered person, and she was already unhappy with Ethan. Seeing his henchman here made her even more annoyed. "When you die, I'm going to dance on your grave in this dress." Brent didn't bother arguing with her and simply said, "Come with me." However, Everly took out her invitation letter and said smugly, "No thanks. I have my own invitation." Before the two of them were finished with their talk, Olivia had already reached the second floor of the building. Her father had enjoyed coming here. He didn't have much interest in anything, but he liked collecting antiques. When the Fordhams had been wealthy, they'd had a broad collection of antiques at home, ranging from valuables from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance era. Not many knew that Jeff also liked to paint and carve in his free time. As Olivia walked through the Baroque-style hallways, she noticed that several of the antiques displayed in the glass cabinets looked rather familiar. They had once been her father's treasures. A wooden statuette with a small line of indents on one of its arms caught her eye. It was the one she'd bitten after her father had pulled her leg, saying that it was made of chocolate. She'd only been 6 years old at the time, and she'd thought all her teeth would fall out after she'd bitten it. Now, she found it cute and funny with those indents. Tears welled up in her eyes as a wave of nostalgia engulfed her. She stood rooted to the spot before the glass cabinet, staring at the statuette, reluctant to leave. After a while, she finally snapped out of her daze. She turned away from the cabinet, reminding herself of why she was here today. As she looked away, her gaze locked with Ethan's, who was also standing in front of the stage. He looked dashing in a pitch black wool coat that outlined his slim and fit figure. He stared directly at her, his eyes like two deep, bottomless pits. He looked away after a short while. "Excuse me." Olivia walked past him as if they were mere strangers. Not long after that, Marina came to him, beaming. "Ethan, why are you here?" Callista, who was beside her, chimed in, saying, "Of course he's here because of you. You two love each other so much that you." The banquet hadn't started, so people were walking around and looking at the displays. Callista's act of calling Olivia out had attracted the eyes of many. Noticing the frown on Ethan's face, Marina hastily hooked an arm in his and explained, Olivia and Callista were classmates. They had some grudges in the past. It'd be inappropriate if you meddled in their business. Ethan silently removed his arm from hers and straightened his tie. Marina didn't continue the topic or move closer to him. Instead, she simply reminded him, "Besides, you and Olivia are already divorced. What would people think if you tried to help her now? We're getting engaged soon, and the hospital is in the middle of preparations. Any rumors about you will greatly affect Miller Group's shares. Logically speaking, you should keep your distance from her." "Who told you I was going to help her?" Ethan retorted as he left without turning back. Callista tried to make things worse by pointing at Olivia and declaring, "It's clear that this thief came without an invitation. Everyone should check their belongings to make sure that nothing gets stolen. Where's the person in charge? Are you even doing your work? Why is there a thief in here?" The person who spoke was Michael Crosby's son, Sean Crosby, who'd appeared out of nowhere. Sean had never met Olivia before. He simply looked her up and down and said, "Miss, please leave." Olivia found it rather amusing. Calmly, she asked, "Why should I leave?" "Miss, everyone's seat is based on the amount they have donated. There's no place for you here," he explained. "That's right. Why waste your time explaining things to a thick-skinned woman like her? We don't even know if she's been sanitized. Look at the way she dresses. It'd be so embarrassing to stand next to her." Callista had stirred up such a commotion. Although no one came at Olivia, everyone's words were like knives stabbing her. Nevertheless, Olivia stood where she was, her face expressionless. Slowly, she said, "I've already donated." Hey, how much can you even donate?" $5. Maybe $3. Why don't you tell us?" Olivia had never been one to show off, but she was forced into a dead end now and could only say, $5 million. That made Ethan turn his gaze back to her, a frown gracing his face. He knew that Olivia wasn't a materialistic person and wouldn't bother to lie. He'd given her $10 million, and she'd already donated $5 million. What was she thinking? $5 million? Aren't you afraid that your nose would grow like Pinocchio's for lying? Marina added, "Miss Fordham, please be honest. The truth always comes out eventually, and your lies will be exposed. You don't even have an invitation with you. Stop being pretentious. Who said she doesn't have an invitation? Who said she didn't donate?" Both Everly and Michael Crosby spoke at the same time as they rushed into the room from opposite directions. Michael's eyes landed on Ethan, and he said, long time no see, Mr. Miller. I knew you were coming, so I had my men arrange a seat for you. Follow me, please. Thank you, Ethan said nonchalantly. Michael then rushed over to Olivia and said in a welcoming tone, Miss Olivia, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. The expression on Sean's face was similar to that of the people around them. Hastily, he asked for confirmation from his father. Dad, did she really donate $5 million? Michael stared daggers at his son. Miss Olivia has a heart of gold, unlike you, idiot. With that, he turned to face Olivia with a kind and amiable look. Miss Olivia, I had my men specially prepare a seat for you. This way, please. He was so respectful toward her that everyone couldn't help but inhale sharply. This young woman in a down jacket had actually donated $5 million. Was she out of her mind? To Callista and Marina, Michael's words felt like a slap across their faces, whereas Everly found the entire thing very satisfactory. With an expressionless face, Olivia walked past Marina without even stopping to glance at her. However, Everly purposely stopped for a moment and said, Miss Carlton, you're going to become Mrs. Miller very soon. Why do you still have to sit behind Liv? And who gave you the guts to make a ruckus in front of her? Everly. Don't be ridiculous. Marina seethed, punctuating each word. Everly raised an eyebrow and said, Trust me, when you die, I'll do something more ridiculous in front of your grave. Seeing Marina dumbstruck made Everly's foul mood disappear instantly. Instead of sitting with Olivia, Everly decided to stand beside Marina instead. Without the slightest hint of being shy, she raised her hand and said, Mister, I'm a good friend of Liv's, please get me a seat. As Everly took her seat, the lights dimmed. Marina whispered a threat, Don't push your luck, Everly. Push my luck? I haven't even exposed you as a homewrecker yet, Everly retorted. Despite the dim lighting, she could see that Marina had turned as pale as a ghost. This, in turn, brought a cheerful smile to Everly's face. I just love how you can't do anything about me even though you can't stand me. Marina, I've got evidence of all the things you've done. If you dare provoke me and Liv again, I just might reveal everything to the whole world. If I were you, I would cut my losses and stop right here. Don't act all high and mighty when you're nothing but a sly fox. Glaring at her fiercely, Marina remained quiet. Meanwhile, Olivia hadn't expected to meet Ethan again so soon. They didn't talk at all, and any passerby would have thought that they were strangers. They were both indifferent to the auction going on, not reacting to the high prices offered. As the auction approached its end, Sean himself took the stage. Next is an ancient garden estate that boasts a history of 100 years. A classic garden estate was displayed on the screen. The Fordham residence had been built by Olivia's ancestors. Later, it had been redesigned and renovated to incorporate some modern elements while retaining its historical significance. Its selling point was its excellent location, which was in the most happening area of the city. It was highly valuable, regardless of whether one wanted it for personal use or business purposes. From the pictures, Olivia saw the familiar courtyard, where the flowers on the tree were about to bloom. She remembered that Jeff had buried his best wine under the tree, saying that he would dig them up for a toast after she had a child. Alas, he couldn't wait that long. Sean announced, "We'll begin the bid at the price of $1 billion. Feel free to offer a higher bid if you are interested. It'll be hard to find a location like this." Olivia and Ethan both raised their paddles at the same time. $2 billion, they said together. Olivia looked at Ethan, unable to comprehend why he wanted to compete with her. The property was special to her. What did it mean to him? Just then, Ethan's phone vibrated, and Marina's message appeared on the screen. "Ethan, I want the Fordham residence." Olivia had saved $5 billion for this property. The Fordham residence was in a prime location and had great commercial value. Experts had gauged its market price to be in the range of $2.5 billion to $3 billion. $2.1 billion, Olivia continued bidding, determined to win. After her second bid, Ethan was the only other bidder still contending. $3 billion. By raising the price, he was telling Olivia that he intended to get the property and that she should stop bidding. He knew her limits. After donating half her money, she would only have $5 billion left. $5 billion was an astronomical sum to many, but to the wealthy Millers, it was merely a drop in the bucket. Olivia's grip on the paddle tightened. Gritting her teeth, she announced, $3.5 billion. This was her telling Ethan that she wouldn't back down. The Fordham residence was very important to her. However, Ethan raised the paddle once again. $4 billion. Everly, who'd been squabbling with Marina just a few moments ago, was suddenly in a low mood. Ethan had to be doing this intentionally. There was no way he didn't know how important Fordham residence was to Olivia. Smirking, Marina asked, "What do you think Olivia will do if the price is raised to $5 billion? Finally, it was all clear to Everly. "You're the one who wants Fordham residence, not Ethan." Grinning from ear to ear, Marina answered, "Ethan always gives me what I want." As Everly took her seat, the lights dimmed. Marina whispered a threat, "Don't push your luck, Everly." "Push my luck? I haven't even exposed you as a homewrecker yet," Everly retorted. Despite the dim lighting, she could see that Marina had turned as pale as a ghost. This, in turn, brought a cheerful smile to Everly's face. "I just love how you can't do anything about me even though you can't stand me. Marina, I've got evidence of all the things you've done. If you dare provoke me and live again, I just might reveal everything to the whole world. If I were you, I would cut my losses and stop right here. Don't act all high and mighty when you're nothing but a sly fox." Glaring at her fiercely, Marina remained quiet. Meanwhile, Olivia hadn't expected to meet Ethan again so soon. They didn't talk at all, and any passerby would have thought that they were strangers. They were both indifferent to the auction going on, not reacting to the high prices offered. As the auction approached its end, Sean himself took the stage. Next is an ancient garden estate that boasts a history of 100 years. A classic garden estate was displayed on the screen. The Fordham residence had been built by Olivia's ancestors. Later, it had been redesigned and renovated to incorporate some modern elements while retaining its historical significance. Its selling point was its excellent location, which was in the most happening area of the city. It was highly valuable, regardless of whether one wanted it for personal use or business purposes. From the pictures, Olivia saw the familiar courtyard, where the flowers on the tree were about to bloom. She remembered that Jeff had buried his best wine under the tree, saying that he would dig them up for a toast after she had a child. Alas, he couldn't wait that long. Sean announced, "We'll begin the bid at the price of $1 billion. Feel free to offer a higher bid if you are interested. It'll be hard to find a location like this." Olivia and Ethan both raised their paddles at the same time. $2 billion, they said together. Olivia looked at Ethan, unable to comprehend why he wanted to compete with her. The property was special to her. What did it mean to him? Just then, Ethan's phone vibrated, and Marina's message appeared on the screen. "Ethan, I want the Fordham residence." Olivia had saved $5 billion for this property. The Fordham residence was in a prime location and had great commercial value. Experts had gauged its market price to be in the range of $2.5 billion to $3 billion. $2.1 billion, Olivia continued bidding, determined to win. After her second bid, Ethan was the only other bidder still contending. $3 billion. By raising the price, he was telling Olivia that he intended to get the property and that she should stop bidding. He knew her limits. After donating half her money, she would only have $5 billion left. $5 billion was an astronomical sum to many, but to the wealthy Millers, it was merely a drop in the bucket. Olivia's grip on the paddle tightened. Gritting her teeth, she announced, $3.5 billion. This was her telling Ethan that she wouldn't back down. The Fordham residence was very important to her. However, Ethan raised the paddle once again. $4 billion. Everly, who'd been squabbling with Marina just a few moments ago, was suddenly in a low mood. Ethan had to be doing this intentionally. There was no way he didn't know how important Fordham residence was to Olivia. Smirking, Marina asked, "What do you think Olivia will do if the price is raised to $5 billion? Finally, it was all clear to Everly. "You're the one who wants Fordham residence, not Ethan." Grinning from ear to ear, Marina answered, "Ethan always gives me what I want." Everly ground her teeth in frustration, wondering how such a despicable person could exist. Lowering her voice, she said, "You stole her man. Isn't it enough now that you're Mrs. Miller?" "Huh, one stole her man. If it hadn't been for her, Ethan and I would have been married a long time ago." "Olivia's the one who stole my man," Marina countered, sneering. "Miss Carlton, with that audacity of yours, you could set a new Guinness World Record. I can assure you that no one will be able to break your record for centuries." "I thought I was bad, but I'm nothing compared to you." "You truly set the bar high," Everly retorted. "Everly, if I were you, I would speak to me politely," Marina threatened, crossing her arms. "Ooh, someone's getting angry." Everly was talented at infuriating others. "I'm not angry," Marina replied, maintaining her composure. Olivia, on the other hand, was boiling inside. She'd raised the bid to $5 billion. Ethan knew her limits, and he could easily secure the Fordham residence by raising the bid by $10 million. When Ethan didn't raise his paddle, Sean called, "Does anyone want to raise the bid?" $5 billion, calling once. Just then, Ethan's phone vibrated. $5 billion, calling twice. Everly was tense too. Things had evolved from an auction for the Fordham residence into a competition between Olivia and Marina for Ethan's affection. Ethan's phone vibrated once again. $5 billion. Sean was about to put the gavel down when Ethan announced, $5.01 billion. Olivia began to tremble, knowing she'd lost. She'd been utterly defeated. Donning a victorious smile, Marina gloated, "Like I said, Ethan gives me everything I want." Everly glared fiercely at the back of Ethan's head, wishing she could pierce through his skull with her eyes. Meanwhile, Olivia chewed on her lips as she watched Marina walk up to the stage to thank Ethan for giving her the Fordham residence. Despite wearing a down jacket in a heated room, the sight made her feel cold all over. For a moment, she saw everything go black, and she had to close her eyes and grab the armrest to steady herself. Everly knew that Olivia had been set to win the bid. Unexpectedly, Ethan had intervened, ruining all her plans. "Let's go," Olivia said, rising to her feet. Everly helped her up. Knowing that Olivia was running out of time, Everly wanted to fulfill all her wishes so that she wouldn't have any regrets when she passed away. Alas, there was nothing she could do about the Fordham residence. Liv. Everly's heart ached for her. Despite her despair, Olivia plastered a smile on her face as she assured Everly, "I'm fine." Perhaps it was never meant to be. Marina was Ethan's newfound love, while she was merely his plaything. It didn't take a genius to figure out who Ethan would choose. Besides, since he'd taken it upon himself to torment Olivia, it wasn't a surprise that he would use this opportunity as well. Everly noticed the sorrow in Olivia's eyes, but she didn't know how to console her friend. All she could do was lead her away, saying, "Let's go." On their way back, Olivia remained silent, her expression devoid of any obvious signs of disappointment. She rested her cheek against her hand as she gazed out of the window. "Eve, let's take a stroll along the coastal road." "Sure." The coastal road was famous for its night view. The shimmering bright lights on both sides of the wide asphalt road made it seem like a stairway to heaven. Olivia rolled down the car window, letting the sea breeze into the car. The chilly breeze seemed to cool her emotions. While driving, Everly reminded her, "Be careful not to catch a cold." "It's just for a little while," Olivia replied. She rested her arms on the windowsill and leaned her head on it. Then, she closed her eyes, enjoying the liberating feeling the wind brought. "Hey, I've made up my mind. After I die, scatter my ashes into the sea," Olivia suddenly said. Everly slammed on the brakes, stopping the car by the roadside. "Olivia, don't make such jokes in the middle of the night." It's not funny at all. Olivia opened the door and got out of the car, taking in the sea breeze. I initially planned to buy the Fordham residence back and have you bury my ashes under the tree in the courtyard. Since I was born there, it would be great if I could be buried there too. Besides, I figured that if I couldn't ever see my father again. Olivia paused for a moment before she continued, since he wouldn't give me that chance, it doesn't matter. When we die, we all turn into dust. It doesn't make a difference where I'm buried. Tears welled up in Everly's eyes as she held Olivia, crying aloud, why does it not matter? If you're buried at the Fordham residence, I can visit you and pay my respects. But if your ashes are in the sea, I'll need to steal Poseidon's trident to see you. Olivia smiled in response. You're quite the jester. Liv, look, you look so beautiful when you smile. Please smile more often, Everly pleaded. Okay. Olivia put on a wide smile. After going through so much, I've also come to accept many things. It's all part of life. The more we want certain things and certain people, the more difficult they are to attain. Once, I loved someone with all my heart. He made me experience emotions I never knew existed, but now everything is gone. It's time for me to move on. Everly hugged her tightly for a long time, unable to let go. At that moment, she hated herself for being a nobody who lacked both power and wealth to help Olivia. She despised the capitalists who ruled the world, snatching away everything that others cherished with a mere flick of their wrist. She secretly swore to make a lot of money and climb to the position she hated, just so she could look down at the rest of the world. Yet would the person she wanted to protect most still be around by then? They found a barbecue restaurant by the seaside. Olivia ordered a bowl of soup and watched Everly enjoy herself. During their meal, Everly mentioned that she wanted to skewer Ethan and Marina like barbecue skewers and roast them on the grill repeatedly. As Olivia drank her soup, she smiled and took out her phone. Pinned at the top of her conversation list was her conversation with Mr. Miller. When she checked his profile picture, she realized that it hadn't been changed. It was one of the couple photos she'd coerced him to take. He was in black, and she was in white. Zooming into the picture, one could tell from the shadows that there was a woman with him. Meanwhile, his shadow was in Olivia's profile picture too. Back then, she'd claimed that even their shadows were inseparable. Olivia deleted his contact. When their conversation disappeared, it felt as if he'd disappeared from her life as well. When Everly went to get more food, Olivia changed her profile picture to a photo that Everly had secretly taken of her. Then she took a photo of the ocean and posted it with a caption that read, "Far, far away." Little did she know that Ethan was waiting for her outside her apartment. Olivia and Everly hadn't returned yet, so he waited in the car. As he'd watched her retreating figure earlier, he'd recalled how she'd donated $5 billion, and that filled him with unease. It was the same discomfort he'd felt when she'd jumped off the building. He needed an answer to his questions. Finally, Brent said, "Mrs. Miller is still having barbecue, sir. She probably won't be back soon." "Where is she?" "It seems like she's at the seaside. She just posted a picture of it." Ethan immediately refreshed his social media feed, but the newest post he saw had been made an hour ago by a random fitness guru. The caption read, "Breaking news. Frequent consumption of fried eggs can lead to this disease." When did she post it? 22 minutes ago. When Brent noticed Ethan smoldering, his voice grew quieter. "Can't you see the post, Mr. Miller?" Clenching his phone tightly, Ethan said through gritted teeth, "She must have removed me." It was awkward that she'd removed Ethan from her social media but not his employee. Warily, Brent pointed out, she also changed her username and profile picture. Ethan snatched the phone from Brent. Her profile picture was now a photo of herself under a dim streetlight. The soft light outlined her silhouette, and her hair was dancing in the wind. Her gentle smile completed the picture. Ethan swiped his finger over her lips, but all he could feel was the cold phone screen. She'd once vowed to never change their couple photo. Her new post showed a blurry view of the sea. Ethan asked, "What does she mean by this?" "Mr. Miller, this isn't my area of expertise. I've never been in a relationship, but when women change their profile pictures and make posts like this, they're usually upset. Tonight's events have likely. Brent didn't finish his sentence because he didn't need to point out that what Ethan had done was obviously not great. Yeah, I know, Mr. Miller, you've been too lenient with Ms. Carlton. Take Collington Cove, for example. It was clearly built for Mrs. Miller, and the same goes for the evening dress. You spent so much time and effort on it, but she insisted on having it even though it didn't fit her. He added, she even changed the hospital name they had initially decided on. It would be no surprise if it made Mrs. Miller disheartened. Instead of replying, Ethan said, take me to the seaside. All right. Brent easily deduced Olivia's location through Everly's recent post. The two men soon arrived at the restaurant, where they saw Olivia carrying a drunk Everly outside. Just then, it began to snow. In the snow, Olivia spotted the tall, imposing man standing by the roadside, almost blending into the darkness. If not for the flickering light in his hand, she might not have noticed him at all. Everly pushed Olivia away and began to curse loudly. If I were as rich as you and if your lackeys hadn't been around today, I would have chopped you into a... Brent quickly covered Everly's mouth and said to Olivia, Miss Fordham, let me take your friend back. Pushing his hand away, Everly continued shouting, hey, handsome guy, why do you look so much like that bastard's lackey? Brent grimaced at Everly's choice of words. By the way, that lackey isn't as handsome as you. He always has a stern face, like this. Everly imitated Brent, who just watched as she dragged herself to the car. Everly patted the seat beside her and said, hey, you're cute. Why don't you let me take care of you? Brent was about to decline when Everly added, I'm really good at taking care of things. The last dog I took care of became so fat and healthy. Brent didn't know how to respond to that. Olivia hadn't expected to see Ethan here. Masking her discomfort, she asked calmly, what about Everly? He put out the cigarette in his hand and answered, Brent will take her home. Olivia wasn't worried about leaving Everly with Brent. She was more concerned about what would happen between her and Ethan. Tiny snowflakes danced around Ethan, creating a stunning scene. He looked at Olivia and said, shall we talk? Olivia didn't even spare him a glance. Mr. Miller, I've been good recently. I haven't had any contact with any man, not even Keith. I've deleted his number as well. If any member of the opposite gender is in my vicinity, I'll run away. So you deleted my number too? Ethan asked through gritted teeth. Your number is still there, and I can still reach you whenever I want. Olivia, Mr. Miller, you don't need to come get me. My car is here. With that, Olivia quickly got into the car. As she was about to close the door, someone's hand gripped it, stopping her from closing it. On the wrist was a watch worth $8 million, gleaming brightly under the streetlight. Ethan stood tall, blocking the light and snow behind him. Within moments, a layer of snow had accumulated on his shoulders and head. His long arm rested on the edge of the car door, and his domineering presence filled the space between them. Fixing his eyes on her, he said, I said, let's talk. His tone was heavy, with no room for negotiation. It was a sign that danger was just around the corner. Olivia observed his figure, taking in the regal air he exuded. He was blocking the light and wind outside, which made the car seem smaller than it already was. Throughout their marriage, she'd always been in his shadow, vulnerable, and without the right to make any choices. She lifted her gaze to meet his calmly. Do you want it now? Is that it? After all, that was the only thing that was going on between them right now. Her question left Ethan stunned. Taking advantage of that, Olivia closed the car door and instructed the driver to go. In the distance, Ethan's figure faded in the wind and snow, much like her dream when she'd been a student. Olivia was restless and antsy for the rest of the night, afraid Ethan would retaliate. However, there was no sign of Ethan for the next few days. Marina, on the other hand, couldn't stay idle. Soon, Olivia learned that Marina intended to raise the Fordham residence and turn it into an animal breeding ground and slaughterhouse. Furious, Everly cursed Marina out. Is she crazy? How shameless can she be? If it wasn't off limits for building a crematorium, I bet she would use the land to pile dead bodies. Now she's killing cows and pigs there to get under your skin. Olivia's face fell when she heard about it. Marina sure was ruthless. The Fordham residence could be used for commercial purposes or as a personal residence. However, the graves of the Fordham ancestors lay in the backyard, where they had been buried for over 100 years. The Fordham family had wanted to relocate, but a fortune teller had advised them not to as it would bring bad luck. Olivia didn't care about what the fortune teller had to say. In fact, she didn't care that Marina was making her life difficult either. However, she couldn't just watch and do nothing about Marina desecrating her ancestors' graves. At this moment, Marina was playing with her two children. They were fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. Ethan had named the boy Connor Miller, whereas Marina had named the girl Irina Miller, a combination of Ethan and Marina's names. "Irina, come here," Marina called. Recently, Connor had learned to walk, but Irina still had to hold onto the furniture when she took steps. The girl was weaker and didn't have Connor's sturdy legs. "Mom, Mom," Irina reached for her mom. "You're amazing, sweetie. Let me give you a hug," Marina said, before turning to Connor. "Come here, Connor." Connor glanced at her before quickly turning away, showing no intention of coming over. He had Ethan's cold, aloof gaze. Since Ethan had brought Connor back, he'd always been staring out of the window. He ignored everyone and kept to himself. Occasionally, when he fell asleep, he would call out "Mommy" a few times, but when he woke up, no matter how much they coaxed him, he wouldn't utter the word again. Since birth, the child had never been close to her. Although he and his sister had shared the same womb, their personalities were completely different. Marina watched him as she mulled over it. Just then, her assistant entered the room, saying, "All the arrangements have been made, Ms. Carlton. I used my connections to expedite the approval process, and it should be done soon." Marina handed the child to the nanny beside her so that she could open a bottle of red wine. Watching her glass fill with the dark red liquid, she grinned. "I want to see how long she can stay calm. Mr. Miller and Olivia have already divorced, Ms. Carlton. Since Mr. Miller is so devoted to you, why do you still need to do this?" the assistant asked. Marina glared at the assistant, asking, "What do you know?" The assistant trembled in fear and quickly lowered her head. "I'm sorry, I spoke out of line." Marina knew well that Ethan's kindness to her had nothing to do with love. He'd done it out of a sense of responsibility. She'd thought that Leia's death would make him completely disgusted with Olivia, but he'd only become more emotionally entangled with her after their divorce. As long as Olivia was still around, Marina's status as Mrs. Miller would never be secure. She'd waited for several days, but Olivia hadn't fallen into her trap yet. Nonetheless, she refused to believe that Olivia would remain calm after finding out about her plans to turn the Fordham residence into a slaughterhouse. Soon, she received a call from Olivia. "Hello," said Marina sleazily. "It's me, Olivia." Olivia sounded slightly annoyed. "Why did you call me, Miss Fordham?" Marina asked. "Marina, we all know what you want. Why don't you drop the act?" Olivia retorted. "No need for small talk. I'm at Collington Cove, and by the way, bring that Hilton chick with you." With that, Marina hung up the phone. Meanwhile, Olivia's face fell. It was clear that Marina wasn't only out to humiliate her, she also wanted to punish Everly for her previous act of defiance. She could already see it coming. Olivia looked at Everly, who was busy whipping up a soup for herself in the kitchen as she hummed a song, oblivious to what was happening. "Everly, I'm going to the supermarket for a while. I'll be back soon. Do you want me to take you there?" "No, thanks. I just want to get some fresh air." Everly didn't suspect anything. After all, Olivia hadn't done anything fun or leisurely lately since she'd been solely focused on improving her health. "Don't be out too late. I'm making chicken soup for you tonight." "Okay." Olivia smiled and nodded before she picked up her hat and scarf. Fully prepared, she took a taxi to her destination. She considered all the possibilities for how this could play out on her way to Collington Cove. All she had to do was abandon her pride and cooperate. With Marina, it couldn't be that difficult. What did her pride matter when she was about to die anyway? It was her first time inside Collington Cove. The decorations were all to her liking. Blue arches, horseshoe-shaped windows, gray walls, and white curtains swaying in the sea breeze. It had a mysterious, romantic air to it. It was a pity that the owner of the house was Marina. With the maid leading her, Olivia arrived at the spacious and bright living room. The room sported a 270-degree circular floor-to-ceiling window that provided a clear view of the sea from every angle. Before she spotted Marina, something touched her leg. It was Connor, whom she hadn't seen for some time. "Mommy," he called out, his voice cute and pleasant to the ear. His eyes were sparkling like stars in the sky, and Olivia felt a little more affectionate toward him. Connor opened his arms toward Olivia, drooling as he said, "Mommy, hug me." Olivia wanted to reach out and pat his head, but the nanny quickly came over and took Connor away. "Oh, come upstairs, quickly, Connor. Mommy will come to play with you later," the nanny coaxed. Connor was very upset about being taken away and began to cry, reaching out his arms towards Olivia. "Mommy, Mommy." Olivia's heart ached, and she was surprised that she felt this way towards Marina's son. After a while, Marina appeared on the second floor. As she could hear Connor's voice from afar, she told him, "Good boy, you finally know how to call out to me. I'll come to you later." Connor ignored her and kept looking in Olivia's direction. Marina plopped herself down on the sofa as the maid asked, "What drink would you like?" Marina rested her head on her hand, looking at Olivia with indifference. "I heard that you bake good cakes. If that's what it takes to get the Fordham residence, I can bake for you." Olivia got straight to the point. Marina laughed in response. Olivia, I should have expected this. After all, your family has its own business. I'm sure you've been taught that you have to give something to get something. I assume you want to talk about Fordham residence. What makes you think you have the right to negotiate with me? What do you want to eat? The maid will tell you." Following the maid's instructions, Olivia baked a plate of honey cake. "Too sweet," Marina commented. Olivia baked a second one. "Too hard." Olivia kept finding excuses to reject it. When it came to the fifth attempt, she poured the batter on Olivia's hair. Olivia held her anger in check, letting the flour mixture run down her hair and drip to the floor. Olivia lowered her head, trying to conceal her emotions. Her voice was very soft, making it difficult to discern her emotions. "Miss Carlton, I'm not a chef, so I cannot bake something to your liking." Yet Marina didn't stop there. She haughtily responded, "Olivia, you should know that I hold grudges. Didn't I tell you to bring Everly with you? This is the consequence of not listening to me." Olivia knew that Marina's arrogant and reckless behavior was all thanks to Ethan. Olivia, on the other hand, had no one to back her up. That's why Marina thought she could treat her however she liked. As Marina gleefully enjoyed Olivia's misery, the latter, who'd been considering it for a while now, suddenly moved. Swiftly, she picked up the remaining bowl of batter and slapped it on Marina's face. Evidently, Marina hadn't expected Olivia to retaliate. Just like that, her new hairdo was ruined. Exasperated, she screamed, "You little bitch! What have you done? No one would dare to do this to me." As her face was plastered with batter, Marina couldn't see where Olivia was after the latter had retreated. Grabbing at the air blindly, Marina tried to seize hold of her. Sensing movement, she lunged forward, only to step on the batter, slip, and fall to the ground. "No one has done this to me before either, Marina. You aren't the only one who has been pampered their whole life. You can't just ruin my hair as you please." Taking full advantage of the situation, Olivia slapped Marina hard before stomping on her a few times. "This is for my dead child. This is for my dead marriage. Ah, I'll kill you, you little bitch. Help me, you silly fools. Why are you doing nothing? Marina was infuriated at being physically assaulted by Olivia. Meanwhile, the only maid in the kitchen was frozen in shock. By the time the other maids arrived to rescue Marina, Olivia was holding a sharp knife. "Stay right there." Since her face was still covered with batter, Marina couldn't open her eyes. However, she could feel something cold against her neck. "If you move an inch, I'll kill you." Marina was utterly shocked. She'd never imagined that Olivia, whom she'd bullied in the past, would suddenly go berserk. Gulping, Marina said, "If you dare to hurt me, Ethan won't spare you." Sneering, Olivia answered, "He never spared me to begin with." "Marina, why must you always take everything from me? You even want to take away Fordham residence when I have done nothing to offend you. If you keep this up, I'll just end things right now." With that, Olivia brought the knife closer, causing Marina to let out shrill cries. "Stop it, you'll be dead meat if you kill me." "Well, I won't be alive for much longer. Trading your life for mine isn't too big of a sacrifice. I don't have a lofty, esteemed life like you do. Since my life is in ruins, I don't see why I shouldn't end it all right now and take you with me." Shivering in fright, Marina cried, "Stop." Olivia sighed, asking, "What other choice do I have? I just want my possessions back. Yet you take the things I work so hard for away from me so easily. Not only that, but you're determined to destroy them too. Since I have nothing left, you're coming with me. It's just Fordham residence. Why, you can have it back." Olivia had prepared more ways to torment Marina, but the latter had folded so quickly. Given Olivia's unusual, erratic behavior, Marina was truly afraid that she would hurt her with the knife. "Why should I trust you? You could always go back on your word, and I wouldn't have a chance to do this again." Marina thought to herself, "Do this again?" Hurriedly, she explained, "I'll make a call right away to cancel my application. I'll transfer the deed for Fordham residence to you. If you don't believe me, we can get lawyers to notarize this agreement." Softly, Olivia answered, "Do you think I have no leverage against you? I've only been trying to be civil all along." Emotional, Olivia violently grabbed Marina's hair. "Isn't Ethan a loyal, perfect man? Aren't you his precious sweetheart? I'm sure everyone would love to hear that he has an ex-wife, and you're nothing but a heartless, sly woman. I have all the evidence." She knew her threat was unlikely to affect the untouchable Ethan, who'd never cared what anyone else thought about him. However, Marina had worked hard for her achievements, and her reputation was everything to her. Hence, the threat effectively made her quiver in fear. All right, I got it. Well, it's just Fordham residence. I'll give it back to you. Just keep the knife away from me. One last thing, if you dare to trouble my friend, I will ruin your reputation. You're a smart woman, Miss Carlton. I'm sure you understand that it's not worth losing everything over such petty matters." Before this, Olivia used to think that engaging in such petty fights was unbecoming of her. Now all that mattered was the satisfaction that it brought her. Marina felt like her scalp was about to be ripped off her head. Her gloating behavior had vanished into thin air, now replaced by desperation instead. Yes, I'll listen to everything you say. The knife, please. My neck hurts." The edge of the knife blade was stained bright red with blood. While Olivia had exerted enough strength to make Marina bleed, it was in no way life-threatening. "Remember this pain. If this happens again, I will kill you right away." "Yes, I understand." Trembling in fear, Marina decided to avoid this psycho in the future. Finally, Olivia released her grip on Marina's neck. Cursing her rotten luck, Marina kicked the maid aside as she headed upstairs to shower and get changed. Connor, who'd been forcibly taken away, was wailing for his parents. Despite her best efforts, the nanny's attempts to pacify and soothe him were all in vain. When her phone fell out of her pocket, Connor crawled over to grab it, drooling as he called, "Dad. Call Dad." Sometimes, Ethan would video call Connor through the nanny's phone. Hence, the nanny had no choice but to call Ethan. When it came to Connor, Ethan always answered his calls immediately. The moment the call connected, he was greeted by the sight of Connor's bloodshot eyes. He looked like an albino rabbit. "Dad," he cried, sounding rather aggrieved. Ethan wondered what caused Connor to cry like that. After all, he barely cried even when he fell. "What happened?" Ethan asked. "Sorry, Mr. Miller." Connor started acting strangely when a guest arrived and insisted on clinging to her. "He started crying after I took him away." Since the nanny was Ethan's employee, she didn't withhold any information from him. A guest, Connor hardly ever initiated going near anyone. He wouldn't even show Marina any affection. "I think they called her Ms. Fordham," the nanny answered, oblivious to Olivia and Ethan's relationship. Just then, Connor rushed to the window as if he'd made a new discovery. The nanny trailed after him, calling out to him. Since they were on the second floor, they could see Olivia, who was wiping her hair with a wet towel. The sight of her filled Connor with excitement. Sprawled on the floor-to-ceiling window, he repeatedly cried, "Mom! Mom!" Above is the entire content of episode 3. Thank you everyone for listening.